so shy then, couldn't even say a word to you. Beautiful lady, beautiful girl that I once knew. I was the one who sat there waiting at the edge of your sweet world, yeah. Helen, if you ever hear this song, won't you please give me a call? If you ever hear these words, please give me a call. I often wonder where you are and what you're doing. Do you remember? Do you even know my name? We swam at the same pool, we shared the same Fijian sky. Beautiful lady, beautiful girl that I once knew. I was the one who sat there waiting at the edge of your sweet world, yeah. Helen, if you ever hear this song, won't you please give me a call? If you ever hear these words, please give me a call. Give me Helen, if you ever hear this song, won't you please give me a call? If you ever hear these words, please give me a call.
Hello and welcome to SDAQ&A. My very special guest today. Do I say Mike Coburn or Colburn?
Colburn is great.
Colburn.
Just like you're burning coal.
Burning coal. I have a friend whose last name is spelled similarly to yours, but they have a silent L in there. So that's interesting. Sorry about the muting there, but welcome everybody. I said to Mike off air, usually the audio's on, so sometimes I mute it and then forget to turn it back on, and just did that as a demonstration. We've called today's program I Too Left Adventism, Mike Colburn. And I've done that because we had a very interesting interview with Tyler Morgan, Season 8, Episode 12, where he'd just left the Adventist church the week before. And I thought, you'd announced also that you took your name off the church last week sometime. And I thought, well, anyone that leaves the church a week ago will have a bit of a theme going on. And so we're going to hear about your story. And we'll also make it clear that we're not attacking people. A lot of people misunderstand scrutiny and putting the spotlight on ideas, ideologies, systems, leadership frameworks, as somehow attacking them personally. This is not what is happening. We are looking and shining the light on systems, ideologies, theologies, and how they can be helpful or harmful. One thing I've noticed, Mike, and I don't know if you have yet or that you soon will, is that when you ask some tough questions, instead of people going, hey, this is an opportunity for me to really define what I do believe and present that, they get very upset. You're attacking me. You've hurt my feelings. You've just got an axe to grind, that kind of thing. And other Adventists, when they've been asked the hard questions, they sometimes answer them in Facebook, in groups or comments and whatnot. But when you say, hey, why don't you come on and do that publicly, they generally don't. And then there's another group where they will come on, but kind of reveal that maybe they haven't defined how they defend their beliefs. So all we're doing, I'm just going to read a quick quote, is something that Ellen White suggested we do. And I think this kind of stirring is not stirring the pot where you want to create confusion and dissent or anything like that. It's stirring the pot to make all of us think, because largely speaking, the church mainstream body doesn't really jump into the conversation and lend their word to helping to discuss these things and put some of them, lay them to rest. So they're going to keep percolating until people have the ability to sit and talk and dialogue and answer some of the questions. And here, Ellen White noticed this. This is one of her messages. She's speaking to a bunch of teachers and students. And she said, point after point of truth should be investigated, for there is no limitation to the truth of God, and in its study a most lively interest should be felt by both teachers and pupils, that they may know what God hath said. For years the voice has been saying, I said to her, is saying to us, agitate, agitate, agitate. Study every point of truth, that you may know for yourselves what is truth, in distinction from error. Let students search for themselves, that they may know the deeper things of God. Let his work be done in the Spirit of Christ. Put no restriction upon the students. When I first read that, I was blown away, because it's pretty much what I've done all my life. And I have valued the conversations that I've had with people and the learning that I have had as well. So I wanted to put that there in the beginning, because every week I get oh, you're attacking Adventism, Pete. No, not happening. This is a purely, sometimes putting a pretty pointed spotlight onto some things, but it helps the listener who feels a bit upset by this to go, well, what do I believe? Can I defend it? Instead of just crying, oh, wow, you're hurting my feelings. So anyway, that's enough from me. Mike, tell us about you. You left the church last week officially. Touch on that, but I'm sure there's been years of build up to that. Maybe not. Tell people who you are, your Adventist background, your career, and briefly what led to last week. And then I'm going to unpack a little bit more detail.
Yeah, well, Peter, thank you for thank you for having me on. And it's amazing that technology allows us literally across the ocean. You know,
Amazing.
you being in Australia and me being in Arkansas, United States. It's just incredible that we can do this. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'm Mike Colburn. Many Adventists that might be watching might know the Colburn family. Believe it or not, the Colburn family is fairly well known in the Adventist world. We go back third generation on my dad's side, fifth generation on my mom's side. In fact, last time I asked my mom, We have relatives that go all the way back to the time of Ellen White, or at least interacted with Ellen White. So you talk about it being in our DNA. It's literally in our DNA.
Yep. I'm the same.
So it's deeply entrenched. Now, on top of all that, I'm a PK. So my dad was a pastor, a career life pastor in the Michigan Conference. He retired in Tennessee. And Dad, Mom, if you're watching, I love you, even though we don't always agree. But it's been an interesting, challenge, standing up, expressing your beliefs, like you were mentioning, having reasons for taking certain stance that I do and that my family does. But it's been such a rewarding experience, as my wife and I, which we've been married for over 20 years. We've got twin girls that are 14. They're watching right now. My twin girls. Hi, girls.
Nice.
They do.
Hey, and they're 14, are they?
They are. They started their
Nice.
ninth grade year this year. I cannot believe they're in ninth grade. Time flies. But it's been an interesting experience teaching them, asking questions, having dialogue as a family, questioning things that are said inside the church, outside the church, things that are preached, things that are taught, videos that we watch of other people dialoguing. So it's been a family experience. It's been a family journey. This has not been a Mike Colburn journey. This has been a family journey. And of course, we'll get into some of the dialogue on the ins and outs and all that. But our official turning in of the letter came off of the return from the Gillette, Wyoming camporee that just ended, which was our last big shindig with the Adventist church. And it was an interesting, awkwardly weird experience, having over 60,000 people that you just feel like most of them don't really see eye to eye with what it is that and what's going to transpire and all that stuff. And so it was awkward. It was interesting, but this has been it's been a God thing. God has been moving in all of it, even though many of my friends and our friends and family, I don't know that they feel that on the other side of the conversation. But it's definitely been an opportunity for us to grow closer to Christ and closer to what it is that He really wants us to do in life for Him. So yeah, that's a little background.
Thank you. Hey, we're getting lots of great comments coming through. I like to bring them onto the screen sometimes, but we'll also have a bit of a Q&A later. We have a break about an hour in, and then people can ask specific questions. But Nancy, Claiborne, Burning Coal and Burning Clay. Hi, Mike and Peter. Nancy's interview with her husband, Mark, the other week was amazing. And
Nancy and Mark, we go back to the Johnson City Church, so we went to church together in the Johnson City Church in East Tennessee. So it's been fun getting to know, kind of reacquainting ourselves with them after some years. Yeah.
And Joseph Strovas, let's go, Mike. Thanks for all your work, guys. This is going to be awesome. And let's see. Oh, Patrick Opini is watching. How are you, Patrick? Good to catch up the other week. Facebook DM me is the best way to get in touch. And we've got Alpha Matter. Pete, you just can't get enough of Ellen, can you? Oh yeah, I just realized the song I played at the start sounds like I'm saying Ellen. If you ever hear this song, it's Helen. Yeah, it's a song I wrote called Helen. I didn't realize that. Last week, a lot of people were saying, hey, you're writing songs about Ellen. John Kayla's watching. Good to see you, John. Cindy is tuned in from Chicago. Hello, everybody. You're early today. Oh, are we? No, I think we're usual time.
Maybe she's saying early for you.
Yeah, early for me. Yeah, that's true. Okay, just check. Well, lots of messages coming in, so we might have to come to those a little bit later, but it's great to see the conversation going there. I wanted to explore a little bit two things. Just share, your generation, you're a lot younger than me. I sometimes feel like my generation was the last one to have nightmares about the end of time. And during the intro, I, for fun, held up this book, which put the heebie-jeebies in me now by Mary McLeod, who eventually left the church. Generations post me, are they still having these nightmares around 7 to 11 years old about the time of trouble, running to the hills, persecution? Can they keep the Sabbath during the Sunday law? Just talk a little bit about when you were that 6 to 12-year-old age. Did you have some of those kind of nightmare experiences, or is it just my generation and before?
So that was only a couple years ago for me, right, Peter?
I know you only look about 25, so I was surprised when you've got
Oh,
two
goodness.
14-year-old girls.
I appreciate that. I'll pay you well later. So yeah, I actually, when you brought that up, it's funny you bring that up because my mind immediately went to the one. I don't have a lot of dreams at night. I'm not that type of person. Okay. My wife, on the other hand, does, and she dreams very vividly, and I get great detail when she tells me what happened and transpires, and I'm always wondering, like, what's going on? But for me, when I was a kid, I remember very vividly, I don't know how old I was, but I remember having a vision that Jesus came and like everyone was being like levitated off the ground. And I was watching my friends and family like go up into the air, and for some reason my feet were on the ground still, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh no, is it not,
You weren't
am I
going.
not gonna go to heaven? And I don't know why I hadn't thought about that
That
until you asked that question.
that
So
is interesting. A friend of
yeah.
mine and I used to be a special ed teacher up at Avondale. Great school, by the way. Excellent school. And he, a fellow teacher, and we were talking about we'd both had the exact same dream. And whenever we'd see each other walking around the campus, we'd sometimes stand there and jump and just go, we weren't taken off and everyone else was. So obviously there's some fear element there. I've explored that a bit, and a lot of people say to me, hey, that wasn't my experience. Fair enough, that's good. But I haven't met too many Adventists who haven't had some kind of fear associated with Adventism. In
Hmm.
fact, a lot of the progressive Adventists who cite Des Ford as being the person that gave them assurance of salvation, I say to them, who they also say to me, oh, that wasn't my experience. I say, well, why did that have such an impact on you? If you already felt your salvation was assured, why did Des Ford have such a huge impact on you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, has your wife, can you share some of the dreams and thoughts she had? Because, as you said, she was
Yeah.
marinated in Adventism too.
She's by the way, she is the most wise woman I know. She's the most loyal woman that I know. I mean, after all, how, staying with someone like this for as long as she has, especially after, as we get into some of this, my story isn't the most gorgeous story in the world. But most of what she conveys to me from an adult standpoint is just she's an empath, and so she definitely experiences and feels things that other people just are totally oblivious to. And I've learned that I truly believe that it's a God-given talent to feel other people's feelings and what's going on.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that, for some people it's uncomfortable because that can get into the realm of like the supernatural realm and feeling, entities and presence that is either good or bad or, whatever it might be. And I've got a very vivid story that at some point I might share, depending on where the dialogue goes, where, that the not so good side of the supernatural realm played a very deep role in kind of what shifted our direction in life. But most of her visions, or I shouldn't say visions, dreams that she has today are much more around, I wouldn't say fear, but just around making sure that our home is protected, and that, even before we got on today, and my wife is a prayer warrior, and she went around the house anointing the house and praying over, making sure that the stream would go well and the technology would go well. And because, I'm here to tell everyone that if you don't believe that the supernatural realm is real, It's very real, but we shouldn't be afraid of it because Jesus Christ is real.
She sounds like an amazing person, and yeah, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
very, very proud of
You've
her.
got a
Yeah,
great little family core there.
yeah.
I kind of left the church because I felt my family core being threatened.
Mm,
Um, and my initial thing was the women's ordination thing, and I've got two little girls as well, and I'm thinking I'm bringing them into something that suppresses women, and no one seems to be doing
yeah,
anything about it. But
yeah.
that's not true. People are doing something about it. Just want to bring a quick question up because our program today is saying you left the church last week. Arthur
Mm,
and Teresa Beam, how are you guys? I interviewed Arthur and Teresa, absolutely incredible people. They've got their own YouTube channel. Go and check it out. Adventist Talks. Have I got that right, Arthur and Teresa? But Mike, did you actually send a resignation letter? We did one ourselves, and that was interesting for sure. Yeah, there's kind of two phases. People leave often and don't really say, or they do tell people. A lot of people who have left, I've discovered, actually haven't taken that step of taking their name off the rolls. So
yeah.
yes, I think you actually did. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so first of all, I've never personally met Arthur and Teresa, but I have read their book, It's Okay Not to Be an Adventist.
Yes.
And so I do appreciate all the hard work that they've put into that. It's a fabulous book. Anyone that hasn't read it, you should read it. It's fabulous. And so thank you for all the hard work that you put into that as a team. But yeah, we actually did, and we even took it a step further. So I drafted the letter. I put
Quick plug.
together. Yep, there it is. That's the book. Fabulous book. And I put down. It was over 20 reasons that we felt like we just could no longer. We just intellectually did not resonate with the teachings of the church. And the night before I turned it in, our whole family sat down at the table. Our girls read it. My wife read it. We all made sure that we knew what we were doing. And my daughters asked questions, hey, but what about this topic and this topic? We made sure that we all were on the same page, just as a family, as a teaching experience. And then we all signed it, every single one of us, because my girls were baptized into the Adventist church. I was able to baptize them into the Adventist church. And so, it's a family decision. We turned our letter in. It hasn't officially hit the board yet because the first board meeting will be here in September, but I was affirmed by the church clerk as well as the head elder, as well as the pastor, that it would be dealt with. And I'm a little bit different possibly than many people because, again, as we get into my story, we didn't just leave the church. You've got to understand that our family has put everything into the Adventist church. When I say everything, we're both musicians. My girls are musically inclined. We sing, we play. I'm a concert trained pianist. My wife is a vocalist. I'm a guitarist. We do praise and worship for the church. The last 2.5 years, I was the head elder at the church that I left. And my wife was running the women's ministries. We were both running Bible studies with church family. So this is not, my kids were in Pathfinders. This is not like a small decision. This is a decision that, in all honesty, we knew would cause quite a bit of waves because of our involvement, our interaction. And so this was not something that was done flippantly in any way. This has been 2 to 3 years coming with intentional study and a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, a lot of research, a lot of, shouldn't be that way. But when you're coming out of a framework that's very, can I say cultic? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah. There are cultic leanings, that's for
Um,
sure.
My wife and I dialogue back and forth a little bit. Yeah, and if you get into very strict, conservative Ellen Whiters that are very much, I would label them definitely cultic. And then you can get, veins of much more progressive, much more like, I don't believe in her, we don't need to, that feels much less that way. But I feel that it's very difficult coming out of the framework that is Adventism, to come out of it in a way that people applaud you and are okay with you going to another church. And that is very unique. It's not unique only to Adventism. There's a gentleman I met
Mm.
that was part of another Protestant church that his story is almost identical, but it's totally not the Adventist church. And so there are other churches that's the experience. Almost a church that's structured that way is not a part of the body of Christ. It's like they're a separated appendage.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You're breaking up a little bit that end for some reason. I'll just check it's not my Wi-Fi. No, it seems to be okay, but we'll persist. But it only
Okay.
broke up for a second. This last week, I've had 3 people write either to me or on my posts, and have used the example of, I think, when I've been kind of questioning, do you guys support Ted Wilson's claims or not? And he's very much bringing the Adventist Church back into heritage Adventism, traditional Adventism, historic Adventism. And so I've done a few posts about him, and people say, "Oh, look, look at America right now. Just if whoever gets in at the elections in November, would you leave America based on that?" They're kind of inferring, well, if you disagree with Ted, doesn't mean you leave the Adventist Church. And I don't find that a very helpful analogy. Sorry, those that have made it. You're all very intelligent, smarter than me, and you see value in that. But I see Adventism as something a little bit different. You're not saying you have to leave Christianity. And as we've said on previous shows recently, often people, if they go to a new town and they were attending a Baptist church prior to that, all of a sudden they just find the nearest Episcopalian or, Methodist or whatever other church they go to. Whereas Adventists have an identity wrapped up with Adventism, and they say, well, I can disagree with Ted and still be an Adventist. Sure, that's fine. But why not maybe, talk about those disagreements publicly? There's something different about that analogy. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, why is it a silly analogy? I know it is, but I can't pinpoint why. I'm not smart enough.
I don't know that I know why it is. I think there's at least my experience in the Adventist church is that as you become a part of the we'll just call it the team, part of the culture, part of the Adventist DNA, there's an identity that's placed in who you are as an Adventist, and I think that's probably reaffirmed and propagated, if that's a fair word, because of how the remnant concept is taught, because of how Sabbath is taught, because of how the Ten Commandments and the eternality of the Ten Commandments. Like, there's specific ingrained doctrines that instill this pride that I think can be good. We should all be very proud of who we are as followers of Jesus. But that's where it goes a little sideways, I think, because instead of being proud of who we are in Jesus, it's, are you an Adventist? And it's just, this is a common thing in my family. My wife and I joke about this all the time, because when we're having conversations with my parents, my mom, and guys, let me just tell you, when I talk about my parents, I love them deeply. They are the most wonderful, godly people in my life. They're beautiful people, okay? So I'm not in any way disparaging my parents in any way, okay? I'm just sharing what their framework is on the other side of conversations I've had with them. My mom, when she explains who she's interacting with, she'll say things like, they're an Adventist, or they aren't an Adventist. It's a way that in the mental framework that's instilled in Adventism, you're either in the club or out of the club. And that's not what they mean, I don't think. But that's the way it comes across. And that's the reason why I paused to say, I don't think Adventism is by true definition a cult, but it has cultic behaviors, and it has behavioral manipulation that happens to people that causes people to have fear, concern, trepidation. They're not willing to get out. They're not willing to step out. They're not willing to think on their own. Because the minute you think on your own and you think something contrary to what, either the beliefs say or Ellen White says, I'll tell you what, you're the target, especially if you speak out. If you keep it to yourself, you're okay. But the minute you speak out,
Sorry, we've lost you.
especially the higher level you are inside of the system. Did you lose me?
Can you just say that again? After you said the minute you speak out, we lost you after that.
Yeah,
Right
I
at
was
the
just
beginning.
saying that the minute that you speak out, there's this trepidation or potential concern of losing. I mean, you want to know an extreme situation. Des Ford is a great example because he was even promised that his job would be okay. No,
Yeah.
come out here. Everything's fine. Do the research. Your job's okay. We want you to be honest, transparent. Well, he did his job, and then the poor guy got just completely ostracized. He just got fired and terminated. So it's an extreme example, but the level of that happens is dependent on where you're planted in the system.
You're right. Yes. Yeah. Good point. Good point. And interesting there with the Des Ford case. I'm going to be doing a very short show soon. I'll probably title it something like the lie at the center of Glacier View, and that lie is that Des actually went along with the consensus that was voted on. Yep, happy to go along with this, and everyone was like, "Phew!" And Bill Johnson himself perpetuated this myth that the majority didn't see light in Des Ford's ideas. In 1984, he said that on the Ankerberg show. In my interview in 2020, he says the majority, agreed with Des Ford's message. So not only do you get suppressed, ostracized, put out to pasture, you have almost a systematic way of trying to make sure that the fold is kept safe, information is not given out. And that's why people get angry and talk about this sort of stuff, because that kind of stuff is shameful. So of course we're going to keep talking about it until the church apologizes and admits the lie.
Yeah, we should be allowed, especially as modern thinkers, we should be allowed to express our thoughts without fear of being, condemned, let alone condemned by the very people that we shared church with. I mean, if we're really Christians, right? And my wife was reading something earlier today to me. Jesus himself said that he didn't come to bring peace. He came to divide.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And Ellen White herself, the quote I read right back at the beginning: agitate, agitate, agitate. She said God told her that. Tell the people to agitate, agitate. So look, we've got a question here. What was the final straw? I'm going to also bring up on the screen how people can, get connected with what you're doing also while you're pondering this and answering this question. The final straw, I think you said something about the camp meeting you'd just been to. And also, how many years back did you start going, hang on a second. So what was the seed and what was the final straw? So put a date on the seed if you can.
Yeah, well, I'll be hard pressed to put a date. My mind doesn't think that well past probably a year or so, and I'd love to think that actually has to do with my age. I think it's just I tend to think forward and backwards.
It's a musician thing.
Maybe that's what it is. I have always been kind of a rebel in the way I think. I'm a mathematician by trade, so I majored in mathematics. I'm very analytical, very much a logical-minded individual, and so since very early in my life, I've always seen discrepancies, been concerned with discrepancies, pointed them out. Of course, at a young age, they were never really allowed to be. Hopefully, you got that fly.
It's a very annoying mosquito, and
Oh
they
no.
they bite. Anyway, sorry if I'm
No,
listening
it's fine. I
intently.
have to ask a question.
I'm
Are
just
Australian mosquitoes bigger than United States mosquitoes?
bigger and carry worse kind of sometimes carry
Okay.
worse kind of content in their bellies.
All
They
right. Fair
you can
enough. Well,
get sick.
I hope you get it. Not sick. I hope you get the mosquito.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry everyone
Goodness.
for I'm just clapping along with
That's
the
right.
praise.
So, anyways, what I was saying is, like, I've always been kind of a rebel in the way I think. I'm always testing for congruency. I'm always testing for stability in the way someone thinks and the way someone is processing what's being said. So I didn't really get to use a lot of that in my early years, just because I was told this is the way it is. And I remember even into my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, even in college, I remember being the guy that, man, I would combat people on the truth of Adventism. And I had all the proof texts and all that. Like, I knew every little argument because I wanted to prove that I was right, that we were right, that Adventism was right. So if you fast forward, the actual official tipping point for me, the final straw, is actually really interesting. So I held up a book earlier. And if you haven't yet read anything or seen any information from this scholar, goodness gracious, you're missing out. Your life has not been fulfilled yet until you read something from the late Dr. Michael Heiser. I was introduced to him probably around 2017, 2018. And the big linchpin dialogue that just got me super intrigued was Genesis 6. And if any of you know anything about Genesis 6, it's this concept of the Nephilim copulating with women and angels. Is it angels? Is it Sethites? It's actually, if you haven't read it, it's a very controversial conversation. And the way it was explained to me early on just didn't make any sense to me. And it's the traditional Sethite, interpretation. Again, I'm not here to dialogue on all of that, but Dr. Heiser, as I began to listen to his podcast, which was the Naked Bible podcast, and began to read articles, he's a Hebrew scholar. He's done a ton of work with Faith Life, which is tied with Logos Bible Study software. I was introduced to Logos Bible Study software in 2015, which is where I began to delve into how to actually study the Word and get into the original language and manuscript work and word, how to actually dialogue with the text on its own contexts. And I owe a lot to Dr. Heiser. And so the reason why I'm bringing him up is this is the beginning stage of the major dialogues I had to have with my dad and with people in the church, the other pastors. And everyone was uncomfortable with these because they can't, inside the Adventist framework, you can't go against what Ellen White says. If she makes an affirmative statement on something, if she's kind of gray, like, okay, but, it's like the reason why the Adventist church has their stance on Michael the Archangel isn't because of academic work. Now, academic work has proved in the Adventist framework what Ellen White said, but it's faulty. And there's problems with it. There's major problems with it. And this is the case with a lot of the issues that I would bring up. I would read some really high-level academic work. I would pull together lots of journals and dissertations and academic articles on topics that I wanted to dialogue with, which, by the way, got me into this book. I was showing you this book before, but The Origins of Evil Spirits by Archie Wright, which is tied to Genesis 6, which turned me into this book, which is Angel of the Lord. All of these things are obviously not stamped Review and Herald. So they're off limits. They're evil. They're going to lead you astray. And I remember I say that sarcastically because I remember some of the most vivid interactions I've had and memories I've had tie to what my dad has said to me. And it's also why I think most of my life I've looked for to be affirmed by my dad. I just want him to like say, I'm proud of you. And my dad's not a highly affectionate like individual. He loves deeply, okay? But I never really knew growing up like why I constantly would go back to have these conversations with my dad. And the conversations would be met with a couple of things. If they got very, very heated, I mean, very combative, okay? Verbally aggressive, not like mean, but just verbally combative, okay? I remember multiple times my dad would throw, well, Mike, I've got the MDiv, you don't.
Yeah.
And again, that is not to disparage my dad. My dad is a very smart individual. He's worked very hard to get to where he is, and I love him to death. But this is the internal framework of the Adventist system. The minute you start using your brain and thinking for yourself, reading things that are different perspectives, different, ideas, the fear is you're going to be led astray. And this came to a pretty interesting head for me several years ago. It's probably about 5 years ago. My dad made a statement to me. And it was in the midst of me really digging into like academic work and studying and reading a lot of books. And my dad said, Mike, be careful, because if you're not careful, you're going to read yourself, you're going to study yourself right out of the church.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so I tell you all this background to get to the actual straw of what, looking back, what really kind of broke the camel's back. And it was, I went to an SBL conference with a very good friend of mine. Actually, you said his name earlier, Joseph Stravas. He actually lives in the same town that I do. We work together, good friends. We study on a regular basis together, grab coffee on a regular basis. So Joseph, thank you for your friendship. Appreciate you tons. But we went down to the Society of Biblical Literature in Houston, I believe it was, if I remember right. Anyways, it was in Texas. Texas is big, so I can't remember exactly. And I was excited, first of all, because I was going to get to meet the likes of like Tim Mackey and Jim Walton and like the big wig scholars that have had a lot of influence in my academic reading. And because it was where Heiser used to go when he was still alive. He caught stage 4 cancer and he passed away. This was about a year ago when he passed away. So this was fairly recent when I attended the SBL. It was about a little less than a year ago. And one of the things that I learned about this first time attending is that it's an international academic scholarship conference with thousands of meetings over like a 6-day period.
Wow.
With all kinds of different religious affiliations, some evangelical, some not. There's a whole lot of like odd woke academia that's you have to be careful of. But I was kind of excited to go to some of the academic scholarship meetings by the Adventist Biblical Research Society.
Interesting.
So I had both Joseph and I, we had several meetings on the docket, and we happened to go, I remember very vividly, we walked into the first one early, like, the super excited, geeks that want to go to these things and we want to show up early. And we happened to walk in, and the meeting prior to the actual event was an entire academic dialogue on Ellen White and how her red letter books, the historical significance of them, and all this ins and out. And I just went, hold on a second. We're at biblical conference, and the top, and then I remember looking at the entire theme for the Adventist Research Society, and the theme for that year, I give you one guess, I'll give you two guesses. The first one doesn't count. What do you think the theme was?
Oh, Ellen White.
It wasn't Ellen White. I'll give you one more try. What do you think the theme was?
I got no idea.
It's the theme of Adventism.
The end of time, the Sabbath.
It's the Great Controversy.
Oh, okay. Well, those three things are all under that umbrella.
Yep, it was called the Cosmic Conflict.
Yeah, that's their big push. Yeah,
and so every single academic paper that was read, dialogued about, tied either to the Cosmic Conflict or to Ellen White. Every single one of them.
Wow.
And we sat in on this scholar reading his dissertation paper on Michael, the archangel, and how it's Jesus, because that's the way Adventists see it. And I am not a scholar, okay? I don't hold that title. I just read and study. And I can tell you how quickly it was to pick apart problems because I just read. And that's the biggest thing. If anyone sitting here, if you just would pick the Bible up and then read what scholars talk about and dialogue about, the problems in the text and the difficulties, you're going to understand what the text is supposed to say without a framework that you have to fit it to. And that's, I think, the biggest. That was the actual straw that broke there. That's when I realized that even at the academic level, Ellen White was being dialogued about all the time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And even the progressives who say she's in the back seat revere her like she's Elvis Presley. They might not listen to Elvis Presley every day, and Elvis Presley might only come out for his hymn ballads or whatever. But there's a revering of her that surprised me, because these people that are the progressive Adventists that are a bit older than me were my mentors growing up, and they said, "Oh, we don't put much, emphasis on Ellen White." So I didn't. And so now that I'm doing these shows and interviewing a lot of them, I'm going, "Oh, hang on a second. You guys do love Ellen White. She's in the back seat, but you are super fans." Another thing I wanted to just raise about what your dad said about you'll think your way out. That has really helped me understand why Adventists generally go really upset immediately, "Stop attacking my church." And because they're not able to defend their beliefs. So when we challenge, when we challenge their beliefs, instead of going, "Hey, no, this is what I believe, why I believe it, and I can defend it," because they haven't been reading too much about it, they can't defend it. And so
I would say to add to that, I would say they can probably tell you the proof texts, but what they can't do is they don't know the difficulties with the text that are brought in by reading other scholarship work.
Exactly.
Like they don't know what the holes are because they only read the books that are approved inside the system. And I say only, I'm not saying not all Adventists are this way. We're just talking in a broad. Anytime you speak in broad strokes, you obviously brush over people that's not the case.
So, we're speaking collectively. We're not attacking individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, what I want to do, and by the way, if you notice anything in chat that you want to raise, let me know, but we will come to the chats a bit later on. I want to kind of back up again now and drill down a little bit on some things you've already covered. I want you to go back again to some of your experiences in childhood as an Adventist, the pastor's family. You're in the Michigan conference. So we just want you to go back again a little bit and just share some more of those childhood experiences as an Adventist in a pastor's family. You've touched on those, but can you just share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the Michigan Conference in the United States, I keep forgetting that we have an international audience.
Yes.
Um, so the Michigan Conference in the United States is known to be the most conservative conference in the U.S. At least when I was young. I don't know if that's the same to this day. So I was born and raised in Pontiac, and my family early on, my dad took a pastoral position at Hastings, Michigan, and Delton, Michigan. Now, most people won't know either of those, but I promise you, if you have any connection to Adventism, that you will know a city that was about 40 minutes from my house. Battle Creek.
I was just going to say, I know that one. 40
So
minutes from your house.
yes, so we were right there. I mean, I remember my oldest brother actually attended Battle Creek Academy. So I remember going to Kalamazoo, which is, that whole area, Kellogg, I remember, seeing some of the history. I remember going to Ellen White's house because it's there. I mean, you can see the heritage. And so it was an interesting backdrop for my childhood, to just have a very conservative family, a pastor's family. And guys, I had great memories as a kid. I mean, we didn't want for anything. We always had clothes on our backs. My parents were always great providers. Very, very, very stable home. A funny story. I mean, I never saw my parents argue ever. Literally. I mean, it was so much so that I remember we took a vacation all the way out to San Francisco when I was probably 17, I'm guessing, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. And my parents got into a very heated argument that I'd never seen in my life. And I thought they were going to get a divorce. Like my childhood was very, very calm, very stable, very much centered on church, centered on Sabbath, centered on, the Adventist way. We were good vegetarians. In fact, I was taught to be such a good vegetarian that the thought of eating meat would just make me gag. It was very, very ingrained. Now, I'm here to tell you that I am a meat eater, just so you guys know. So when we came out of the church, that was one of the first things
You've overcome the gag reflex.
Yes, and I can tell you that meat is very delicious. So my childhood, fond memories. A little funny story about my childhood. We lived at a house that sat up on a hill with a lake that was just kind of on the bottom of the hill. And I should have said it wasn't a lake; it was a pond. It was a pond that was very dirty. I mean, it had lily pads, snapping turtles, like all the stuff. It's not really a pond that you'd like to swim in, but we swam in it. Okay. And it was really funny because when the snapping turtles got bad, we would call our neighbors who were down the road on this one lane. We had 3 neighbors on the same road. And Derek, who was my best friend as a kid, they would come out, they would catch it, and they would do what you do. And they would cut the head off, they'd drain it out, they'd make turtle soup, and they were happy. They loved it. Of course, that was a no-no for us, right? But I remember thinking stuff like that. Like they were doing bad things and we were doing good. It was this dichotomy that was instilled in me as a kid. Like they're doing the wrong things, I'm doing the right things, which is odd thinking about it now.
So what things seemed important to you as a young child growing up in the Adventist framework?
The most significant thing was making sure that we kept the Sabbath properly. Whatever, it's funny thinking that way now, because how do you even keep it? I don't know a Christian out there that actually does keep the Sabbath, period. In fact, I would argue it's impossible to keep the Sabbath now because the Sabbath was tied to the sanctuary. So
Mm.
the Sabbath was very, very important. Attending church, our lives centered around church. Of course, my dad was a pastor, so we were constantly going to evangelistic seminars, or doing Bible studies, or doing. So it was a lot of my childhood. While I remember vividly getting into fights with my brothers and like that whole thing, right? Playing games around and doing stupid things that boys do. But as far as like the atmosphere of Adventism in my life, it was our life. I mean, everything was related or correlated in some way to the church.
Mm.
And I think one of the downsides, I would say looking back, is that it took my dad away from his family a lot.
Mm.
A lot.
Mm.
Because he had so much dedication to the church and winning souls and doing the work that was, that he believed, and I know he believes firmly that God called him to do. And so, yeah, the church was the thing. It was.
Yeah. And they move a lot of their pastors around every 2 years as well, which makes it difficult for you to have a sense of stability and
Yeah.
routine.
Yeah, for sure. And that's true. We moved from Hastings to we moved all the way up to Midland, which is I started my piano lesson experience at the age of 6 in Hastings, and then we moved up to Midland in Mount Pleasant, which my grandma Colburn, lived in Saginaw. I remember very vividly cramming 20 plus Colburns, in a small, tiny, tiny house on Ruby Street with my grandma. And my grandma would cook us great meals, and us kids would sleep underneath the tables and cram into, I had a great childhood, like just great memories. But every single one of my aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, every single one of them were Adventists. All of them.
Yeah, yeah. When you're raised in a good family with good memories, and there's a blurring there of an us and them feeling, and
Yeah.
Adventism permeates in not such positive ways sometimes, while also at the same time having positive things going on, which can make it confusing. When I left the church, I felt like I was taking off the jacket of Adventism. A lot of people have said, "Oh, cut your skin and you'll still bleed Adventism," or take the boy out of Adventism, but you take Adventism out of the boy, that kind of thing. But I literally felt like I was taking off a coat. I hung it up. I can still look at it. I can chat to other friends that are wearing the Adventist coat. But underneath that, I was wearing a T-shirt that had the values that had been instilled, honesty, kindness,
Yeah.
honor, this kind of thing, the golden rule, and many of the values that you see in the Gospels as taught by Jesus. So I had those values. So can you share the kind of values that were instilled in you, but also how they may have been somehow seen to interweave with Adventist kind of values? So, it's a bit of a nuanced question there. So I'm trying to tease apart this notion of, yes, you get values instilled, but when you wear the Adventist jacket, sometimes those values have a filter on them. Can you share
Yeah.
any kind of values that you felt may have been instilled in you that were great, but they have a bit of an Adventist filter through them that can kind of lead to some issues or problems?
I think that's a great question, by the way. It's almost like you run a live podcast where you interview people.
I actually, by the way, at the intro, I mistakenly put the intro up for this in the scholars one, where I sit back and don't say anything. So those
Yeah.
watching, if you saw the intro, this is not a scholars interview where I just sit and listen. This is a normal conversation. So
I
apologies.
think probably Probably the first go that I would have, the first attempt at that question, at least what pops into my head is one word, and that's perfectionism. And I don't know if I don't know that I would label that as a good quality. I think it has some damaging traits to it. I think that we need to. I learned as a musician to strive for perfection, to strive for a great performance, to strive for doing your best. And I think that that fits well into the Adventist framework. Unfortunately, like you said, I think that gets filtered into the way you see later on in life, the way you see your relationship with God, the way you see your relationship to salvation, justification, sanctification, the nuances of that. So, even like where you're spending your time, are you spending enough time reading the Bible, and what does it look like, and are you doing it right? There's this nuance to, I think, the idea of perfection, because I was taught to give my best, to always give my best. And even to this day, I mean, my wife and I run a very large financial firm that's got our name on it. So like my name's important to me. And I want people, when they think of the Colburn name, I want them to think about, quality and value and, giving my best. That we're always, one of our core values is always leaving the jersey in a better place. No matter, no matter your interaction, no matter if you make a sale, don't make a sale, it's always about doing what's best for the client. So I think there's aspects of, or what maybe filters down from perfection, that potentially can be damaging. Because perfection is, listen, I'm not here to say I know everything, but I think I can say that perfection is an ongoing thread in Adventism. And it gets heavier and heavier the closer you get to Ellen White, because she very clearly had a concept of her relationship with God where she battled between being perfect, blameless. It was the way she viewed, the sanctuary, and the way she viewed the no blemish and blemish and the sacrificial system and what Jesus did for us. Now you too can keep the law perfectly and obey. And like there was all these, so all of that filters into like this worldview that I think, while it's potentially a good thing to strive for doing things well, we are human and we're sinful. If I read my Bible right, Paul says we're all sinners.
Yeah.
And we cannot be perfect. We cannot do everything perfectly.
Yeah, that's a very good answer to that that question. I've had people say to me, well, that kind of perfectionism didn't occur in my life. Ellen White didn't come across that way to me. Carol Platt once said to me, why is your experience a justification to cast judgment on all of us who have not had your experience? So let me ask that of you. What would you say? Why is your experience a justification to cast judgment on all of those who don't feel that is their experience?
Yeah. And my response would be, I don't think my experience should cast judgment on anyone else. It's why, if any of you get a chance to read any of my blog articles on the Thinking Cup, and if you listen to anyone like Miles Christian, for example, on Answering Adventism, I think it's dangerous to deal with how you experience things or how you see certain things. I think that what we should be doing is addressing what the church proper teaches.
Right. Yeah.
And
Whether you've
how
taken that
that
on board or not. Yeah.
yeah, and how do you agree? Do you see eye to eye with what the church teaches? Because
Mm.
what happens is how doctrines get filtered down into the church is really, really interesting. If you go ask someone about Ellen White, I'll give you a really great example. We have a fabulous lady that's been studying with we've got a home church that we do here at our house every other week. And there's a lady that's been attending that's a newer Adventist that's kind of coming out of that situation. And when we began to talk about Ellen White, it was almost like she had never even heard of her.
Mm. Mm.
Because her experience in the church, that in the vein of Adventism that she was introduced to, that particular church didn't want anything to do with talking about her.
Mm.
And so I would say, is that a fair representation of Adventism?
Yes.
And that's where my personal and my family's personal struggle is it's not the way you think Adventism is experienced or the way you've justified your interaction with Adventism. My concern is, do I actually believe what the church teaches?
Yes. Yes. And in my recent post about several of Ted Wilson's claims of what Adventism is, a lot of progressives say, well, we don't have to agree with him. And I say, okay, that's fine. And someone wrote in the comments, forget about being an SDA growing up. I cannot and will not turn my back on the Sabbath. It is biblical and way before the SDA Church. That's great. Keep the Sabbath. That's fine. Do make it the rest day. But the Adventists teach officially that it is not just a rest day. It has a circle around it that Ellen White said God told her that it will one day be a test of salvation. So you can say, well, I don't believe that. But I think back to that question that Carol had asked me, the thing is not that we are trying to judge you for choosing what you want to believe. We're saying, do you believe what your church demonstrably stands for and believes? And you can say yes or no, but at least be willing to say that I keep the Sabbath. I don't keep it for salvific reasons. My church does teach that it is a salvational issue. That's the kind of thing. And that's why I really love Carol Platt and her family. And I really appreciate questions that her and others like Kay Judge raise when they think I'm attacking the church. I'm just saying, where do you place yourself against these teachings of the church? Ted Wilson, when he talks about these beliefs, sure, you don't have to believe them, but they are categorically, demonstrably demonstrated with, as Miles uses the word, source material. Do you just align with that or not? And if you don't, then you've got to say to yourself, well, at what point do I disagree so much with this source material that maybe I'm not really an Adventist? Am I willing to put my name to it? They're the things that a lot of people, I guess, don't want to really
and
travel down.
I think one thing I would add to that is a lot of this is predicated on how comfortable an individual is with Ellen White. And the reason why I say that is a couple of reasons. What most people don't realize, now, if you take the stance that Ellen White was divinely inspired, like she is who she claimed to be. She couldn't write without the Holy Spirit moving on her. Her writings are just as important as the prophets in the Old Testament. These are all thoughts that she had, okay, and that she claimed. So if you believe her and that is true, just doing a thought experiment for a second, then she also said that the highest authority given by God is
Yes.
when the general conference is in session. So it doesn't, so again, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me if you like someone like Ted Wilson. I mean, that's fine. You don't need to like him. But if you believe, as the church affirms, just go look at the Adventist conference website. It's, do they affirm the teachings of Ellen White? They have an entire confidence of faith in Ellen White, and it explicitly says, we believe that she is a prophet. We believe that she corrects faulty interpretation. And I'm thinking off my head here. I'm not reading this, okay? So bear with me. But they affirm her as the interpreter of Scripture. So what
Yeah.
that means is, if you or I come to the text on our own accord, we wrestle with it, and we then come to a conclusion. Guess what? That's a man-made conclusion, my own accord, right?
Mm.
If it's contrary to Ellen White, it's not true.
Yeah.
And that's her own, that's what the conference teaches about the use of Ellen White. Now, you might be listening now and maybe commenting on this channel and say, well, that's not me. Well, that's fine. But you need to understand that your church
Yes.
doesn't agree with your stance.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if you're okay with that, that's fine. What my family, we just couldn't. Like, this is something
Yeah.
that we couldn't. We had too many discrepancies, too many intellectual gaps where the church believed this,
Yeah.
we believed this. That it just. I told my pastor at a coffee shop. I said, Rick, I can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
Like, I can't compartmentalize when someone comes to me as the head elder of the church and asks me, Mike, what do you believe on this particular thing? I said,
Yeah.
Rick, I'm having to say, do you want me to tell you what the church teaches on it, or do you want me to tell you what I've studied? Because they're not the same. And I said, how
Wow.
hypocritical is that of me?
Yeah.
I can't, that's not, I can't represent the denomination fairly if that's where I'm at. And so that's, again, out of being, at least having some sort of integrity, I have to leave. I can't keep doing this.
A lot of people will have said to me and will say to you, and probably have already, that they feel betrayed because they wished you, like them, would stay in the church and bring about the change. One of the big reasons I left was when I realized the change is not coming because of the core DNA teaching will never change. So you can make a wonderful life within Adventism. You can be a cultural Adventist. You can try and bring about the change if you want. That's great. But please just admit that the fundamental teachings of the church are sanctioned by Ellen White, sanctioned by leadership, and at their very core, the whole of the Adventist view of the gospel is through a lens that many who say they don't agree with Ted Wilson, for example, would not agree with themselves. So sure, stay, but acknowledge that the Adventist church is not going to change. I gave it 54 years of my life, and I told people to stay, and I tried to bring about change. Turns out what they were thinking I was meaning by change was just music style. Can we have it a bit more contemporary, please? That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about these key things that aren't ever going to change.
The last time I looked, they keep adding to the doctrines. They don't take away. Last I
Yeah.
looked.
And then people say, "Oh, but that's not a creed. They're just the 28 fundamentals. They're not
Well,
a creed. We don't have
there
to
was a
belong to a
comment.
creed."
Yeah, there was a comment, I think, in the chat about, many people, think of, they hold the creeds in just as high level. And listen, here's what I'm going to say. This is Mike Colburn. You don't have to agree with me. Okay. This is just, and I might disagree with myself in a year or two because I'm continuing to grow and learn. And my relationship with Jesus is getting closer and closer. And the more I get closer to him, the more I realize what I don't know. I don't know hardly anything. Okay. But what I will ask is, please be honest with what you actually do believe and with what the church teaches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because most people won't do the work. Most people won't understand how the doctrines were even developed in the early history of the Adventist church. I'm talking like 1850s, 60s, 70s. And if you want a really good book to get started on that, read Ronald Number's book.
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
I mean, fabulous book. Okay,
Best book
if
ever.
you want to get context to who Ellen White was as a person, read her writings in the history of when things were going on in the church. And what you'll find, and this is something that's I feel very uncomfortable about this aspect of Ellen White, is there seems to be a theme that when certain decisions needed to be made, she was the one that made it because she had a vision. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a really good example of this, okay? Most people on this call probably don't know how tithing was instituted inside the church. So prior to the Adventist church being organized, there was no tithing. None. First Adventist, second Adventist, and then it becomes Seventh-day Adventists when, after Ellen White said, don't organize because the Lord told me, that whole thing, because Jesus is coming soon. And then, oops, he's taking his time a little bit longer. And so it's okay to organize now. I know I'm being a little cynical, sorry. When the church organized, the problem is that they didn't have a means of gathering enough funding to deal with the actual structure of the church. And so a group of the leaders, including James White, Ellen White, and then the major key individuals got together and they delegated James White to be the person to do all the research and come back and present a biblical version of what they would look at for the tithing system, the gathering of money. So when James came back and he gave this presentation, his whole premise was, listen, we are an Old Testament church, meaning that we believe in the Ten Commandments, we believe in the Sabbath, we put a lot of stock in all that. And so he presented the Old Testament tithing system as it was laid out in the Levitical system. You know what happened to the committee? The committee unanimously voted it down. Mm-hmm. They left the meeting. They voted it down. They left the meeting. A week later, before the next meeting, Ellen White had a vision.
Yeah.
And this is what happens in the system, is that when they were struggling with something, they would wrestle back and forth, and either James or Ellen would have the final stamp. And Ellen had the stamp. That she made the decision of the direction because she had the divine authority, or at least she self-proclaimed that she had the divine authority. So that to me is very concerning, because I don't know any other institution that grew in that manner with that kind of a human calling the shots in the way that he did.
That's a terrific point. And like you say, that's a thread that runs through it all. You mentioned the Ron Numbers book in 1984, the winter of 84 or the winter of 85, I can't remember. But I was at a friend's place in Canberra, and I started reading this book. He had it on his shelf there, not high up on a shelf, low down on the shelf. Yeah. So I got it and I started reading it. 1984, 85, I had not encountered any of that stuff. I'd heard the reverberations of the Ford thing. I noticed all the youth leaders leaving the church. I noticed that you be called a Fordite or a CB, a concerned brethren. I noticed all of that, and I saw this. Oh, well, let's read a little bit about Ellen White copying. What? Hang on a second. I read about 2 chapters. I had to put it down. I did not read it for another 10 years. I couldn't cope with that kind of information, my identity was so held
Yeah.
in Adventism. I then read in about 93, 94, the Ron Numbers Health Prophetess or Prophetess of Health. And
Prophetess of Health. Yep.
that was the first reading material that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I was able to read it because he writes like he's a historian essentially, and he's writing and he's just presenting the information. He writes incredibly well. So I
Yeah.
would highly recommend, if people want to kind of look into this and be able to be guided through it in a less kind of in your face way. Yeah, Ron Numbers' book is amazing. I interviewed him in season 2 with John,
Mm.
and I just absolutely loved that interview.
I'll tell you another, since we're on books, I'll tell you another book that was very instrumental for me, because it had ties to Southern Adventist University, which is where both my wife and I graduated from Southern Adventist University. It's a book by Jerry Gladson,
Oh yes,
and it's called Out of Adventism: A
yes,
Theologian's Journey.
I've
Yeah,
had him
that's a
on the show.
fabulous book.
I've had him on the
Fabulous
show.
book.
Amazing book. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you've reminded me of that book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had a different title to start with, and then he re-released it with a new
Yeah.
title, which was way more effective. And he covers lots of things about the Fred Veltman study as well, and how the church just brushed
Yeah,
that over.
and his experience was very similar to Des Ford, just on a different platform, different, because he was
Yeah.
involved in a lot of the high level scholarship with the Daniel
Mm,
committee and all that stuff,
mm.
and of course eventually got also terminated for his for
Exactly.
his
Yeah.
free thinking.
And even though Des Ford was treated so badly, he lived an exemplary
Yeah,
life
yeah.
and was much loved by all who ever met him, who read his works, who watched his videos, who met he and Gillian Ford. Gillian's watching today. Hi, Gillian. And he never uh, set out to split the church, and he encouraged people to stay. He would have stayed himself. Gillian can correct me, but I don't think they officially left until about 2006. Yes, he was
Mm.
defrocked and lost his job and all that stuff, and was treated appallingly, absolutely shameful treatment. But he stayed. He personified everything that a lot of the traditional Adventists wish they could be. Living a life that seems to be sinless life. um, but I yeah, he didn't encourage people to leave. In fact, he spoke for me at a big meeting down here. I invited he and Gillian down to talk, and I think I had just left the church. And his opening statement, you can find it on YouTube if you look up, I think SDAQ&A Des Ford live meeting or something like that. Um, he talks about how you don't have to leave the church,
Yeah.
and I didn't take that as a reprimand, but I think I'd just kind of mentioned that I'd left, and he was saying, yeah, but there's an alternative. You don't have to leave. So for people like yourself and me that do come to a point where we feel we have to leave, what do you say to people that say, no, 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 you should stay, and we feel betrayed that you've left?
I think I'd probably ask a question back. Why does someone stepping into another Christian church cause someone to feel betrayed in the Adventist system? I think there's a deeper issue there in the way that we see as an Adventist, as how we see other Christians. We really don't. I'm just speaking from personal experience in my childhood upbringing, and then what I experienced as a head elder, even with my eldership team, the way they would communicate about Sunday keepers is not Christian. It shows the mentality that if you're not a part of the remnant, you're not a part of God.
Yes.
Even though no one will say that. Like, no one's going to come out and say that, okay? Trust me, they're not going to preach that from the pulpit. None of that's going to ever happen. It doesn't have to be said
Yeah.
because it's felt in the way you act.
And that's why people are led to that kind of analogy of whatever the US president is doesn't mean you'll leave the country, because
Yep.
they place such a false emphasis on what you've just said.
I mean, I'll tell you just another quick story, and this is very fresh in my mind. This is really my wife's story. So, honey, sorry about this. I'm probably gonna screw it up, but I'll do the best I can. When we were at the church that we stepped out of here locally, a lot of what I did was in the AV booth. And of course, I was the head elder and also ran the AV booth, and was the part of the media team. And
What's the AV booth?
Audio visual. Sorry,
Oh,
audio
AV.
visual.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I thought you said AB. Sorry, my
Yeah,
hearing.
sorry, audio visual
Yeah.
booth. So the irony in this whole story is that our church, the Adventist church that we were a part of, would rent from a Sunday Anglican church. So, or the Anglican church rented from us. Sorry, I messed that up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, which is comical to me because the phrase, the statement that was said when we were practicing Sabbath morning in the sanctuary, we were commenting about the number of coffee stains that were happening in the sanctuary and how do we get it clean and that whole dialogue, right? Which was from the Sunday church. The question came up like, well, do you know how this is happening? And my wife informed one of the elders, and I was overhearing this, that it was happening because the Anglican church went from 50 or 60 members in a 2.5-year period to almost 500 members. I mean, significant growth in our building. So they were two services, packed every week, like the whole thing. And so there was all kinds of stains that were going on. But the unfortunate thing that, and this is the point of the story, this particular elder's response was, well, you know why that's happening. I mean, the devil's working really hard with them.
Yeah. Whoa.
Well, like, what?
Yeah.
Guys, and this happened within the last 6 months at the church, the Adventist church that, and I'm not saying that to disparage the church. I'm saying that because that is the mentality, that is the framework
Yes.
that Adventists don't play well
Yes.
with other Christians. They convert. They want to convert other Christians to be a part of the remnant. Is what they want to do.
And they tend to engage with other Christians and even the community only to proselytize.
That's right. That's right. And so, to the original, I don't even remember the original question that you asked, but the point that I was trying to make,
I guess that what, like, are you? Sorry, I shouldn't have jumped in.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
About those who say, why didn't you stay? Why leave? Some people leave, some people stay. Why can't it be just as effective to stay and bring about change? Sorry, you keep going with what you were saying.
No, it's fine. And I think because of the distinct gap between what makes an Adventist and what makes a Sunday keeping Christian or just a Christian, because of that distinct gap, I would say my wife and I couldn't provide change inside the church anymore because we didn't resonate with what was going on in the church and how people were thinking about the body of Christ and how they were engaging in that whole experience. And so it's a very uncomfortable, it's like a fish out of water. It's like, how do you help a body of believers that isn't willing to read the book, study, be open-minded, like they're not willing to do the work. And I'm just reminded a little bit of a dichotomy. Ellen White says that we're supposed to save souls. I disagree, because you and I don't save souls, Jesus does. So I learned that the Holy Spirit is what I need to pray over people. Like, it's not my job. If the Lord is taking me somewhere else, and that was what my wife and I felt. We were called to be a part of the church for as long as we were, and to deal with what we needed to deal with for the time that we were there. But when the Lord says, go somewhere else, we all need to be like Abraham. We all need to be like the great men of the Old Testament that just listened and did. And so that was very much the experience for my wife and I. Now, it's not easy. It's not easy, but my question is, are you going to actually listen and do what it is that the Lord wants you to do in a way that honors him?
And just out of interest, what happened to the church that was renting the Sunday from you guys, or from that church?
They're
And
still
the
there.
elder said that the devil was working. They're still there because they're bringing in lots of money for the
Well,
Adventist.
that's the irony, right? Like, so what does that make the church if they're taking devil money from?
Devil money. Hey, by the way, those watching, I'm having a fantastic conversation with Mike Colburn, and he officially took his name off the church roll last week. It's so fresh; they haven't even really gotten back to you yet, have they? They're taking it to the what do they call it? The business meeting or the management meeting or whatever they have once a quarter. So keep us posted with that. But we're having a great discussion, and those a lot of people are just joining us now as well. I really encourage you, keep watching, but after it's finished, go back. Like people like Mike and a bunch of other people I have on the show articulate way better than how I present. It's like, great, there's people saying what I wish I could say. So thank you, Mike, for being on the show. And we're going to keep going. We'll go for another 10-15 minutes, have a break, and then we're going to come back and look at some more questions, as well as questions in the audience. It's a long form conversation, so we're creating a resource here for people to watch down the track and to chip away at. It's not just a fast little 10-minute, scripted kind of program. SDAQ&A is much more than that. We're not an echo chamber. So we mentioned earlier your website. I'll just bring that up again. As I said, talking to Mike Colburn, you can go to thethinkingcup.com and learn more about Mike and his wife.
I saw a question come in by I'm guessing it's Alpha Matter. Will you do a Zoom Bible study? I would love, if there are a group across the world that would love to dig into the Word of God in a virtual format, that is something I'd be very open to doing. So yeah, if you're interested, I mean, friend me on Facebook, connect with me on my blog. It's something that's my jam. I love spending time with the Lord. I love spending time in the Bible.
I love that Alpha put that up, because I was literally about to ask you to. I'm trying to do a regular program called SDAQ&A Church, and we had Frank Marandino do our first one last week. I would love you to do one as well.
Yeah.
So, it's a kind of a way to go to people. Hey, we don't always talk about divergent, diverse, robust, agitating kind of conversations. I want to present what you guys see as the gospel into this group, this community that we're building here. Okay, we talked a little bit about Ellen White, well, a lot about Ellen White, and I want you just to drill a little bit deeper onto that and just share a few more things of how the writings of Ellen White played a role in your eventual leaving of the church. Share some more stories around that.
Yeah, so it's funny. There's a couple of very vivid stories that tie to Ellen White and her writings as it relates to how I learned how to study, which is kind of interesting. So I got out of college, and honestly, I didn't really know what it looked like to study the Bible. I knew how to read clearly. I had read a lot of Ellen White. I remember in senior year in academy, that's where my wife and I met. Great Lakes Adventist Academy, Cedar Lake, Michigan. Best year of my life because I met the love of my life.
I'm going to come to that a little bit more in detail later
Yeah.
too. So,
But
yeah.
even in the Bible classes that they taught there, like I remember we were supposed to read Great Controversy, read Patriarchs and Prophets, read. I forget all the ones that that they required, but it was almost as if reading Ellen White, because she's seen as like the divine commentary, was all you needed to study. So this concept of like you read the Bible, and then if you need help, you read Ellen White. Like it's that was like the way the only further depth that I was taught was that you use a Strong's Concordance. that was it. So like, and I'm here to tell you guys, like that is not honoring the text. Like the Bible is an ancient document, and it is very rich if you allow it to be what it is. So, I didn't know as a kid that, you were supposed to study any differently. Like, so I was the good Adventist with the steps to Christ. I even remember when later on when we were married and we lived in East Tennessee, I remember starting it feels so weird even saying this, starting a Bible study at Starbucks with a couple of guys, and we were going through Steps to Christ. That's not Bible study.
No. I know. Hilarious.
So it's like my whole framework for how you engage the word it's the Adventist lens. Now, I'm not saying that everyone learns it that way, but growing up in a conservative conference in an Adventist pastoral family, that's the way I learned it. And that's no fault to my parents. That's just, again, that is the comfortable framework that my parents are in. And so you teach what you have. You can't give what you don't have. And so that was also one of the big passions behind why I wanted to really learn how to study, because I felt like I was dishonoring the text.
Oh.
And so I had this, I have this personality trait that when I lock on something, some call it like an addictive personality. I like to think of it more as a positive thing.
Yeah. It's turning ADHD into a positive focus.
But when I lock in on something and I really get passionate about it, it becomes an addiction. And I've got stories of addictions that are very bad in my life that took me different directions. And so as I grew up and as I became an adult, I really honestly, in my early 30s, I finally figured out what it was like to be addicted to studying the Bible. And that's where I really began to get depth and and what's crazy about the Bible, guys, oh my word, you can think you've studied everything there is to know about it, and you can go back and read it, and there's something else there. It's just incredible, the depth and the beauty. I mean, again, surprise, surprise, it's because the original inspired author is God, right? The original autograph is it's inspired by God. But surprise, surprise, it's got such depth and such beauty and such complexity to it. But yet, it's also simple to understand the gospel if you just read it.
That's what I loved about the Frank Marendino gospel message last week. It is simple, but it's almost a joyous thing to then desire to to seek it more deeply. And people who feel like we're attacking the church, sometimes what we're actually saying is, hey, just go and explore this without the Adventist lens and just see what happens. And for me, as I've said many times, when I left, I had to I could only find a way to get out of the lens of Adventism by just exploring deeply and in an addictive way, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
um, the um, the the four Gospels. I've just read them over and over and over.
Yeah.
And Frank's message last week sort of inspired me to now start expanding. But for
Yeah.
me, I just had to, and it was reading the four Gospels that you start going, well, it eliminates any need for Ellen White. And what does Ellen White say?
Yeah.
I will bring up this a question I think that's just come up on the screen. Is it this one here?
That's my wife actually watching
Oh,
right now.
nice.
Um,
Which is the one that?
so I wanted just three back there. I wanted to address Gospel Adventist. The church scholars are taught exegetical Bible study.
Oh, there we go. There, yeah. Let's bring that
Yeah.
up.
So
Because that's on
this is
ten.
really, yeah, this is really important. I don't disagree. I've talked to many Adventist scholars. I've read many Adventist dissertations, and yes, they are taught a level of academia. My only pushback to this, if I don't know who this individual is, but if you're willing to just think on this for a second, as an Adventist scholar, you cannot come to conclusions outside the framework of Adventism. You can't. It's not allowed. Now, there have been some that have pushed the edge a little bit. If you want to read a really, really good academic book, in fact, I was introduced to it by Dr. Heiser, and he suggested an Adventist scholar on this particular topic. It's the Theodicy of Love by Peckham. That is probably one of the best Adventist books. I've got a little bit of a funny thing about this. It's probably one of the best Adventist academic books that deals with the issue of good and evil and free will. But here's what's interesting. Do you think it was published by Review and Herald, or do you think it was published outside the Adventist publication? Inside of the publication world, a scholar has to be careful where their books get published, because they'll either be taken seriously or they won't. And this is not a negative. I'm not saying this to downplay anything, but anyone who publishes inside the Adventist publication, scholars understand that that's inside the bubble. So the only stuff that's when something gets published outside, and I think this particular book, let me pull it off the shelf real quick. Hold on.
While you're doing that, I'll just bring up again what your wife wrote, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Reading God's Word is so exciting now
Yeah.
that we get to really study it. And it's a
And
different...
and I love watching this woman study. I mean, she's got her own. Check out her own YouTube channel. It's called Reclaimed.
Nice.
She reads through Scripture with those that follow. She does Bible study. Like that woman has got it going on. So
That's the channel there, Reclaimed.
Yep.
Go and click on it.
So this book right here, Theodicy of Love by John Peckham, this is an Adventist scholar. Now, I'll give you a good example of this, okay? This is published by Baker Academic.
Right, yeah, definitely not a sanctioned release.
Now, this is not sanctioned by the church. Okay? And I can promise you it's not, because the stuff he says in here is totally not Adventist. He deals with texts and deals with issues like Heiser and some of the supernatural realm and the gods and all this stuff on a very academic level. Now, I purchased his most recent book, which I thought was going to be really, really good. I forget the name of it. That's how great I thought it was. But it was published by the Adventist Publishing, and it's basically an academic look at the fundamental beliefs. So I'm like, hey, I've got a scholar that I know he can do the work. Okay. I like what he's done here, but when I began to read his details on the fundamental beliefs, it was very light. It was very weak. It didn't engage because it can't. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with John. I'm saying that he can't fully engage all of the issues, the problems, the difficulties in the text, because that's not the function of that type of a book. It's designed to affirm everything that the church teaches. So just understand, in the academic world, it really does matter where you go to school, what your expertise is, where you get your stuff. Do you get your stuff published from Brill? Do you get it published from, Baker Academic? Do you get it published? Like, where do you, like, all that matters in the academic world.
Even Graybill, when he did his thesis, had to go to two different. He had the Adventist version and the, I think it was Michigan State University or something, where his other version came out. I asked him about that when I interviewed him, Ron Graybill, season 2, I think. And I said, did you get a bit of pushback that you had two versions out there? And they kind of, one of them really raised some pretty serious issues. And he said, oh, yeah, whatever, you make mistakes in life, and that was one I made. I quite liked that he said that, instead of trying to really be the apologist and scripted defense. He's anything but scripted in the interviews I've done with him. They're fantastic. I want to just raise...
while you're pulling that up, I do want to respond. Cindy Lou, who is that a reference to the Grinch? I don't know. Cindy Lou.
What did she say here? Is this the
no, just her name I was referring.
Oh, Cindy Lou Woo. Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't have that on my blog. But it's a great idea, and so if you just stay subscribed to it, and you stay, like, I will put together a list. I've got a long list of books that I would recommend, and so I think that's a really good recommendation. So if you give me some time, I absolutely will put a list together of some books that I would recommend individuals to read. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'll read that, because Angela Lima and Angela's watching. Remember, we're going to do a show together, Angela, and talk about the books that really helped us. So maybe if you can send me a list before that, Mike, that'll help give me extra content.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Rick, at the same time, posted something that similar to Frank Merendino. Frank posted in Facebook, Adventist scholars have no-go zones. Oh, sorry, not that one. Des Ford pushed the edge a little more, and look what happened. And at the same time, Rick wrote, just look at Glacier View and Des Ford. That's what happens when you push the needle too far.
Yeah, 100%.
Madeline wrote, and it's a good comment, Madeline. Thank you for sharing. It's amazing that many SDAs will not read the Bible without help from Ellen. I've asked many to read the Bible only. Sadly, no one has taken me up on this. And I thought it was interesting that when I left, I was just sitting there one day thinking, what does the Bible actually say? How much of a filter did I have? And that's when I started my 4 Gospels only project. And, not to say that has to be the way, but it really helped me. Yeah. What is Jesus teaching in the 4 Gospels? That's all I can focus on. And it shed a whole lot of new light onto everything.
Yeah. To Madeline's comment, which I appreciate, I'll say that I'm trying to find that comment. Can you put back up the previous comment reading the Bible? Yeah. So interesting side note, within the last 2 months, month and a half, you'll see, if you go to my blog, there's been a plethora of articles that have been written over the last 2 months. And prior to that, there was almost nothing, because the podcast that I started originally. Just give you some background to what happened. Originally, the Thinking Cup podcast was something that I started with a very close friend. Actually, it was one of the pastors at the Adventist church that became a very close friend of mine. And so if you listen to the podcast, that's back in the day when I was I could say what I wanted to say. I wasn't employed by the church, but my friend was the pastor and he had to be careful what he said. And so you'll catch some fun stuff back and forth if you go listen to the podcast. But when I realized that was exiting, the podcast was disappearing because he ended up taking a position at the conference. I ended up converting the website into a platform to begin to write articles. And this was as we were making the decision to move out of the church. I needed and wanted a space to be able to really dialogue. And I found what's best when you're engaging with issues in the church is not to have debates with other people because they go nowhere. It's best if you formulate your actual arguments on paper so that people can see what you're using and the sources and understand where you're getting what you're getting. And so that became, you'll see in the last couple of months, I've got, quite a bit of articles. They're all sourced. They're all written from at least as academic as I can be for the time being. But I was engaged by two Adventist pastors, I will leave their names off, that told me within a matter of the same week, Mike, if you just pick up the Bible and read the Bible, that I put all your other books aside, I think you'll feel differently if you just read the Bible. Their attempt was to get me to shut down all the other things that I'd been reading to read the Bible because I'd come back to Adventism. And that actually is a theme that I felt when I was a kid. I actually believed as a kid that if I could get someone to read the Bible with me, they would see Adventism in the Bible. It's a myth.
I know. The opposite happens. Hey, we're going to have a short break. Cindy Lou did just write, yes, I blatantly plagiarized the Grinch, hanging my head in shame.
I love it.
And Rick wrote, you did good focusing on the Gospels. Yeah, that certainly helped me. And I really, it was just Jesus teachings, Gospels. That's all I could look at.
Yeah.
Madeline's asked, what's the name of the blog and podcast? She'll go and check that out. And also, can you share the blog?
So
name?
if you go to thethinkingcup.com, if you just go to if you put that website up, if you go to thethinkingcup.com, in the upper right hand there's a menu, and just you'll find the menu and it'll say blog. And if you click on that, it'll take you straight to the blog. So it's just thethinkingcup.com/blog-articles is what it is. But it's all on the Thinking Cup. And if you explore the Thinking Cup, my direction for that is it's a resource. The whole idea behind it is it's a resource where great coffee collides with biblical study. I am a coffee fanatic. I love coffee. Okay. We've got a funny thing in my house. My wife hates it when I say this, but in our home, we have an area where all my coffee machines are. And I very disrespectfully say that is the altar to the caffeine gods is what that is. So.
Oh, I love it. Look, I'm chatting with Mike Colburn. He officially left the church last week, but boy, he's been brewing with lots of thoughts that we're unpacking. We're going to keep going. This is a good long-form conversation. Don't go away. We will be back. Thunder Lorison is watching. Hey, EJ, good to see you here. He's written a couple of points I'll be raising after we come back from the break. And also, I'm going to chat with you a little bit about how you saw the Sunday churches as a child. We'll come back with that. We've talked about that church that was renting your space and how the elder said, because they were growing so fast, the elder said that was the devil's work. So we'll come back and touch on those things and many more. We will be back in about 5 minutes' time. Go and make yourself a coffee, Mike.
love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. Love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again.
Hi, and welcome back. My special guest today is Mike Colburn. You can check him out on thethinkingcup.com. He left the church last week, and we're having a fabulous conversation about the probably 25 years that built up to that. And we're going to continue on with that and also look at questions and comments people are making as well. It's a long form interview. Don't feel that I'm interested in the brief little scripted versions of interviews. I enjoy the long form. But hey, if you're a 1 minute person or a 1 hour person or a 10-minute viewer, you can jump into these shows, watch for a minute, watch for 10 minutes, and you will be very satisfied. There's gems everywhere. And thank you, Mike, for being on our program today. Elsie Thunder writes, and it's good to have him on the show. He's in one of the interviews I did with him is in the top 10 all time of my 300 interviews. And love to have you back on, Thunder, and talk about your new book as well. Well, it's a few months old now. He writes, "Blessings, brothers. It's great to hear Mike's thoughts on these realities in Adventist scholarly world that most wouldn't know." And he mentions that's so true, Mike. You were mentioning about this kind of talking about debating SDAs as literally hitting your head against brick walls. It's painful and one gets nowhere. Documenting your arguments and evidence is always the better way to go. And one thing I've enjoyed with, I'm only 3 interviews in my little mini series of the scholars, I'm calling it. Sometimes they feel a little bit not wanting to come on the show, not just because I tend to interrupt too much, but they feel uncomfortable with some of the questions I raise. So I'm really enjoying just letting them speak. And that's a way to get some of the Adventist scholars onto the program. And we can dialogue in the comments later about what they've raised. But at least we get to hear them speaking on the show. So just before we went to the break, we were chatting a little bit about the Sunday churches and the Adventist perspective of those on the outside. Now, at one point, someone wrote, I think it was Stephen Beagles. He's the Gospel Adventist question that we brought onto the screen earlier. And Ellen, someone else wrote, I'm just trying to find it, because I thought it was a very good, it was Jezebel. She had said to Stephen Beagles that Ellen White had called them heathens, and he said, where do you find that? And she wrote back to Gospel Adventist, E.G. White Writings, manuscript 28, 1885. Truth, they are worse than heathen, but this we are not to tell them. And I read that somewhere just this week, actually. It's been raised somewhere. So there is a real us and them approach. So back to the questions that we were wanting to discuss is, what was your perspective of other churches, these Sunday churches, as a child?
Well, they were definitely other than. The view that they just didn't have enough of the truth is probably the best way to explain it. Or that they had the watered down truth, which is kind of comical now that I think about it, because I feel like Adventism is like not just watered down, it's got like floods of additional information that's not present in the text. So it's like it's like flooded down, the flooded down gospel. So, and of course, and I say this in jest, I do not believe this, anymore. But of course, the worst Sunday church is the Roman Catholic Church. And, and again, I say that not because I believe that, but that's, there's this
definitely Adventist teaching there.
Yeah, there's this real narrative that gets told that is, and again, it's very unacademic, because if you really let the text make the claims that it claims, all of the things that Adventists tie to Roman Catholicism really are tied to Antiochus Epiphanes, and really relate to things that deal with Daniel's time period, or it doesn't really have anything to do with, and this is one thing I'll tell you, the book of Revelation, I've never studied Revelation on my own, independent of a prophecy seminar. In my entire life, until a couple years ago, again, thanks to Dr. Heiser, I held this book up right here. Y'all need to get this book, because this is Heiser's transcripts from his podcast that he did on all of the book of Revelation. And his insight was what turned me on to the idea of studying Revelation, because what he taught me was that the best way to understand Revelation is to understand it in the lens of the Old Testament, because John, who's a Hebrew, John is very Hebrew. Revelation is probably one of the most Hebrew books in the New Testament. And so all of his imagery, all of his language, all of the things that are weird and odd and, things that are apocalyptic and symbolic and like all that stuff that Adventists think they got figured out, when you look at it through the lens of John's Bible, when you look at it through the lens of what would John be thinking about, what would he have, why is he quoting Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and like all these key passages, a totally different perspective of eschatology comes out of that way of looking at it. So, and I saw really quick that the go-to power phrases in Adventism, that relate to the Sabbath and the seal of God and the end time Sunday laws that are tied to the blue laws and like all this narrative that gets, are you prepared and ready? Do you have enough canning available? And do you have a place in the hills that you can go to in case, and I got a place. My uncle lives like 8 miles from the Canadian border, completely off the grid. I went to my
Wow.
junior year in academy. I went to Tamarack Springs Academy. It's a beautiful piece of property. It sits right up against Glacier National Park. So that's where I'd go if that ever happened. But I'm here to tell you, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just the idea of having a global requirement, it's mentally hard to even think that
Yeah.
that would be possible, first of all.
Particularly based on the Sunday law and keeping the Sabbath on a globe, and how hard that is, as we mentioned earlier. Ellen White,
Yeah,
when asked about that, the globe and the sunsets, and if you're in Norway, further up
yeah.
north, there's, I think the sun doesn't dip below the horizon for 3 months of the year, or only just dips. And I think she said, and I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I've seen her say a quote, well, people need to move closer to the equator then. So,
Well,
if you're saying that the Sabbath, the Catholics bringing in the Sunday law, that's what the church teaches.
which is
You don't have to
completely
agree with it or not.
erroneous.
But
Completely erroneous. The
what
Catholic
what a
Church
what a
did not.
terrible way. Yeah, exactly. But putting that aside, the church does teach that, and you don't have to believe it. But the church does teach that,
Yeah.
as a collective, as a denomination, doctrinally. And why would God choose such an impossible requirement to keep and
It,
still get to heaven?
yeah, it's just it's a house of cards, and unfortunately, when you knock one or two down, a
Yeah.
lot of them start to tumble. I wrote an entire blog article on, the Catholic Church and 321 AD and the whole, Constantine and what's said about the church. And I didn't read the history around that until probably within the last year and a half. I read an entire historical academic book on the day from Sabbath to Sunday, and it's edited by D.A. Carson, and it's got four to six scholars. One of them is Bauckham. If you know Bauckham at all, he is a fabulous scholar. But just learning what actually in the history books can be documented, it's such a different narrative
Yeah.
than what Ellen White claimed. And again, that's no surprise, because if you understand much about Ellen White, she took the liberty to recraft historical events
Wow. Yeah.
and to reinterpret them into kind of the way she felt like was reality. So it's no surprise that even to this day, Adventists believe that the day was changed in 321 by Constantine. That is a 100% absolute lie.
Mm.
That is not the date. That there is no date that the day was changed.
Yeah. See, that one thing should be enough to make everybody go right.
And there's historical evidence
Yeah.
that in the 60s, 70s, at least by 90 AD, the early Christian church was gathering and worshiping on the Lord's Day, on Sunday.
Mm.
And there was also some that were doing it on Sabbath. Like, you got to understand that it wasn't until 70 AD that the temple was destroyed. So you have Jewish Christians that are still Jewish, that are still very much culturally connected to their Jewish heritage, that are, and that's why I'm not saying this is what it means, but I'm inclined to believe that when the New Testament writers say things like the law is fading away, remember, this is post Jesus. So technically, when Jesus died, the law is done away with. Like he fulfilled all of the requirements of the law and the prophets. Okay, so but you'll get comments from in the epistles about the law is fading away. I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm inclined to think that that's because it couldn't officially be done away from a Jewish cultural standpoint, and then until the temple was done away with. Now, I could be totally wrong there, okay? I'm not saying that's fact, but there was definitely evidence of Jews that were keeping Sabbath. There were evidence of Gentile Christians worshiping on the Lord's Day. There were evidence of Jewish Christians worshiping on the Lord's Day. And what's really interesting is if you read some of the dialogue of the early church fathers that actually claimed that Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, was a heresy. And the reason they believed it was heretical to worship on Sabbath is because you're acknowledging the group, the Jewish community that crucified their Lord. So there was these ongoing debates.
Wow, yeah.
That, like, again, this is in the 70s, 80s, 90s. This is 250 years before this Constantine figure shows up on the scene. So to make this audacious claim in a prophecy seminar, to claim that in 321, this is like, we figured it out, and this is when it was changed and we've stamped it on the Catholic Church. That is 100% narrative. That's what it is. It's a narrative.
Yeah.
And it's not biblically sound.
No.
It's not historically sound.
It's part of the Adventist script. Adventism's almost like a pyramid scheme.
I was talking to Miles about this just yesterday. It absolutely is the same propaganda everywhere. Like, if you go to a prophecy seminar in California or in across the ocean, or if it's the same bullet points, it's the same narrative, it's the same points, they wait until about the 7th to 9th night before you're going to get the Adventist one. The actual Sabbath one. You're going to get the Sabbath on maybe, it's usually about Wednesday in the middle of the week, because then they're going to tell you about the seal of God right before that next Sabbath. So you have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Like, this was very real in my life. This has happened.
It's Amway. It's an Amway presentation. I mentioned the other day, like recently in Papua New Guinea, PNG, the Adventists had a huge campaign. Ted Wilson was there as well. They either got 300,000 or 600,000 baptisms, incredible amount. They're bragging about it all over the place, and this is a great thing. I was born in PNG. I feel a great affinity with that country, and the residents of that country, the people that live there, and so I'm not trying to in any way criticize the people, the country, or anything like that. But the point is that Mark Findlay created the script for every single program that was presented. So there were, I think, 22 locations around PNG. They all started at the same time. They had the same slideshows. They had the same script that each pastor had to read and go through. It's very much a pyramid scheme like it's a method. This is how we do it. That's why they don't change it. And it works. It works. Hey, we talked earlier about that you didn't have too many dreams as a childhood. We're talking a little bit about the time of trouble and whatnot, and you shared that one dream where you felt like Jesus was coming and your feet were stuck to the ground and you couldn't kind of get up. Did you have any other fears in connection with your understanding of God and marriage and intimacy and persecution and Jesus coming? Any other dreams that might have floated in, or other thoughts you have on that kind of topic?
A funny remembrance. I mean, I remember hoping that the Lord wouldn't come, at least not quite yet, because I wanted to get married and I wanted to. Well, guys, I'm a man, so I'm just gonna be very real with you. Like, I wanted to experience what like you're supposed to experience in a marriage relationship. You guys get it. So like, yeah, there was very much a. I remember very vividly, like, Lord, wait until I find the right woman and I get married, and I would really like to have kids. It's so funny because there's this like dichotomy, like, I want to go to heaven, or I want to be with him, but like I really want the
Yeah.
things that are here, and like if and I don't know that really has any tie to Adventism per se, but it was just kind of a
Well, it
funny
does
thought.
if you're being told the return of the Lord is imminent, and as Ellen White suggests, that it's going to be even more imminent if you play your accurate role. Just a little aside there, last generation theology, when that kind of became more of a talking point again within the Adventist church, lots of progressives were like saying to me, how on earth does the Adventist church get that from, Adventism? It's an abomination of a doctrine, of a thought. And yet, Ellen White, I think I read somewhere she's got over 1,000 statements that confirm this notion of the hastening of Christ's return,
Yeah.
if you follow the three angels' message more accurately. Her very early one, about the food for worms, when obviously, there were people, that everyone in that room eventually did die, and she had said that there would be people in this room that will see Jesus. The apologist answer to that was, well, it was conditional. Well, A, if you're going to say it's conditional, you need to put that into your vision. And B, if it's conditional that Jesus didn't return because you weren't keeping the gospel and the Adventist message accurately, well, that's last generation theology. So either way you slice that
Yeah,
vision, you're going to land on some squirmy ground.
there's this theme inside of a lot of the way the doctrines the way they get lived out, and the way they get spoken of, and the way they get parsed out. There's this idea that we have a part to play in the narrative. And
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with the great controversy theme, and the fact that the Adventists believe that God's character is on trial, that we have to vindicate the character of God. Listen, friends, God doesn't need his character vindicated. God's God. There's no need to vindicate. I have not found, if you find it, please send it to me. I haven't found a single biblical text that says that we need to vindicate God's character. I cannot find it anywhere. But I think there is this, that inserts us into the narrative.
Yeah.
That now
It's
we
very compelling.
have a part to play. I mean,
Yeah.
are you hastening his return, or
Yeah.
did you do something and now he can't come because we're not ready?
Yeah.
Because that is something that she said. She said that if they had been reading the scriptures like they were supposed to, number one, they wouldn't have needed Ellen White, and number two, the Lord would have come sooner.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I know.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why do you think that the progressive liberal Adventists were so shocked that last generation theology could even spring from Adventism? I had so many pastors when it kind of really became a lot more prominent, in the late 2010s. Like, why are they so shocked?
I think it's because most Adventists actually don't read Ellen White. They read snippets of Ellen White, but
Right.
you got to understand, if you want to really study and research what Ellen White said,
Mm, mm,
she is acclaimed as one of the most prolific authors.
mm,
Now, granted, I'm pretty certain that she borrowed a lot of it, but still, okay. Let's just
mhm.
say that she did write, even though she had literary assistants and people doing. Okay, I'm not getting on a sidetrack on all
Yeah.
that. Um,
Let's say she didn't. Let's just take it as a wonderful
but
document
yeah,
given by God.
even if it was given by God and it's all inspired and all that jazz with it,
Mm,
there is hundreds and thousands of pages. And unless you have like the time to read them or a digital platform to study
mm,
and sift through them and cross-reference and she makes an interesting statement because she actually says that I think it's in reference to the testimonies to the church, but it may be a different work of her writings, but she says that they will bear the test of investigation.
yeah.
And I don't think she thought that Jesus was going to wait as long as he has to come.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
yeah.
the amount of information, technology, the ability to study, if you want to really study it, it's not that difficult if you get some digital software that allows you to
Mm,
look at and go through it. So I
mm.
did want to, before I forget, there was someone that
Yeah.
actually asked a question. Michael C., where in Scripture is the law fading? Hebrews 8:13. Good old Hebrews. It's the favorite book of the Adventists. Not just kidding. It says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete is growing old, is ready to vanish away. So that's the reference to the old covenant, which is the law. Okay, this is we'd have to study Hebrews and study through it, but the author of Hebrews is referring to the covenant in stone. Just go read it. It's very, very clear.
Mm,
So the old covenant, which is the first one of stone that brings condemnation, that whole thing, is becoming obsolete. Just notice the language there, and is growing old and is going to vanish away. So I think this is just Mike Colburn's interpretation. Don't take my word entirely for it, but I think that's a reference to the author under inspiration knowing that there is going to come a time where it's no longer going to even be possible to keep the law because the temple will be sacked, and that happened in 70 AD. That's just a me thought. I don't know if
mm,
it's accurate,
mm.
but just something to read into and think about.
And Michael C., by the way, I did email you. Haven't heard back from you. Love to have you on the show. Isaac is just, as we're just looking back into some of the conversations. Just a quick one back from Michael C. He says, so you and Miles disagree on the law. It's a classic loop that Adventists get into. You disagree with the law then? No, we feel the law is given to help us have a better life and become better people on this planet. Oh, so you can do whatever you want with the law. It's this cycle. Like,
Yeah,
how can you definitively answer that? So Michael stops asking the question every show.
I don't know, Michael, so I don't know that I can answer it definitively, but I would ask you to read the Bible without the lens of Moses on. In fact, there's a very specific statement. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I had it pulled up just a second ago. I believe it's 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 3, 7 to 18. Read through that. You want to know why it's difficult to see certain things? I'll tell you why. It's because you have a veil over your eyes because you are reading it through the lens of the Mosaic Law. Don't take my word for it. Go take it up with Paul. He's the one that said it, not me. Okay, don't take it up with me. Just
Interesting.
read. It says here, I'll read it. The law of Moses brought only the promise of death, even though it was carved on stones. There you go. So you want to follow the 10 Commandments. Okay, that's fine, but just pay attention to what the author says here. given in a wonderful way. Still the law made Moses' face shine so brightly the people of Israel could not look at it, even though it was fading, a fading glory. Speaking of his face, there's a whole narrative around that. So won't the agreement the Spirit brings to us be even more wonderful? If something that brings the death sentence is glorious, won't something that makes us acceptable to God be even more glorious? There's a comparison going on between the stone law and the new, what's called the law of Messiah, is what it is. It's the new law, okay? And most people, I wasn't really brought into this concept until I just started really studying. Now, there's an interesting statement here. But the glory of the new covenant is much greater because it will never fade away. This wonderful hope makes us feel like speaking freely. We are not like Moses. His face was shining, but he covered it to keep the people of Israel from seeing the brightness fade away. The people were stubborn. Resonate on that for a second. The people were stubborn.
Good.
And something still keeps them from seeing the truth when the law is read. Only Christ can take away the covering that keeps them from seeing. When the law of Moses is read, they have their minds covered over with a covering that is removed only for those who turn to the Lord. So you want to understand, and this is a very pointed statement to, I think it was Michael, okay? You want to understand why so many Adventists have a hard time seeing. I would tell you that Paul said why.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that the Corinthian church was struggling with the very same thing in the Judaic sense. They were Judaizing the gospel. And that's what happens with the Adventist version of the gospel, is that if we focus too much on the stone law that the old covenant was tied to, we cannot see what Christ done for us. It's impossible.
That's powerful stuff, Mike. Yeah. So, Michael C., you're being too stubborn. I wanted to just bring up on the screen something I hadn't thought of before that Isaac Cabrera has shared. If Ellen White copied and made all this up, could she have really believed in God? At some point, if she ever stepped back and said, here's what I'm being told, oh, look what Paul says, oh, look what this says here, and she ever had a moment of going, I wonder if what I think I'm being told is inaccurate, the God that she is promoting is not really the God of the Bible. So she may, as Isaac said, did she really believe in God? Maybe she didn't really know God.
I think she thought she knew God. I think that's fair. I think I'm safe enough to say that Ellen White couldn't be an Adventist today. Like what they taught, believed, the way they described the Trinity, the way they expressed early pioneer doctrines of the Adventist Church, they could not be baptized today in the Adventist Church at all. Like they did not believe the same thing. Now, some Adventists will explain that as progressive truth. That's a cop-out. That's a cop. Truth is truth. Truth isn't like, and I understand truth builds on truth. I get that concept. I understand that. But if you analyze Ellen White, if she's truly of God, then none of her writings are going to contradict. It doesn't matter if she understood something early on and then understood something else later. That isn't the work of a divinely ordained prophet.
No. The very contradiction indicates she's not a divinely chosen prophet. that
Yeah.
contradiction. So if you go, oh, good, she changed, she progressed, she changed her view on righteous by faith. Okay, so you're proving the contradiction fallacy. Hey, I'll bring Michael C back on for one more question, one more response and question. Give him a bit more airtime, because this is classic kind of response
Yeah.
from the more stubborn Adventist reading the Bible with the Adventist lens. Brother Colburn, the typical SDA response. So I can lie, kill, and lust? What say you?
Yeah. My response is that then you don't understand the law of Messiah. You haven't studied. It's very explicit in Scripture. There are authoritative commands. Now, if you study the original language for commandment, there's very specific words in the Greek that are used, and tole is one of them. And that word is at times translated commandment, but it's it should be better understood as authoritative command. And there are all kinds of commands that Jesus instructs his disciples to do, like the greatest commandment, love one another. These are new laws that are called the laws of Christ or the law of Messiah. Just go read it. Go look in the New Testament for the phrase. There's about 4 times that says the law of Christ or the law of Messiah. And there's very clear indication that in the new covenant, understand this, covenants were ratified by blood. They were contract agreements between 2 parties. It's not a renewing of the old covenant. That's not the way the New Testament speaks of the old covenant and the new covenant. It's a new covenant ratified by the blood of Jesus. With a new covenant comes a new set of requirements. The new covenant is very different than the old covenant. The new covenant is unilateral, meaning that it does not require anything of you. Jesus did it, period. He paid the penalty that the law requires. End of discussion. He doesn't require you to do anything. You believe on what Jesus did and you will have eternal life. That's the way the New Testament speaks the gospel. That's the reason why the gospel is so amazing. If you're a Jew and you heard that, you want to know why it's not such an amazing gospel to us Gentiles? Because as a Jew, that would blow your mind to think that the Savior could save you without anything on your part. Mm-hmm. It would just mind-boggling. So, but you got to understand, in order to understand all this, you've got to understand covenant agreements in the Old Testament. You have to understand how they were contractually organized and that they had to be the ratification of blood. And you have to understand how that all fits into the narrative of the new covenant, that Jesus fulfilled all the old covenants to do a new covenant for us. So what I would say to Michael is, I think you need to spend some time understanding the new laws. There's some crossover, but they're not all the same. And no, that's not giving any license for an individual to kill, commit adultery. No, there's no license being given when you're joined to the body of Christ and you're living in honor of Him. That's a silly question. It really is. And it's just designed to express the same narrative to take someone back to the old covenant. So listen, man, if you want to live by the old covenant, here's the deal. Paul says this: you want to live by the old covenant? Live by the old covenant. But you're going to be judged by what the old covenant required. So that's up to you. I mean, it's his same response with worship. Listen, you want to worship on one day over another day? Do it, as long as you're honoring God. It's fine. I don't have any problem with people keeping Sabbath. Keep Sabbath. It's fine. But do it to honor Him, and don't disparage people that are worshiping on another day. That's Paul. That's not me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love where you were talking about how the Jewish person seeing Paul's study on this would have been mind-boggling for them. And essentially, Adventists, when they try and grasp this idea of the law, the covenants, the old law, the Paul phrasing and theology on this, their minds are boggled as well. They just can't grasp it. And that's why Adventism is such a important theological system to analyze, because I had John Rosier on the program. He said not only is Adventism not the gospel, it is anti-gospel. And he's still an Adventist, and that's fine. He's got a really great Leamington church, I think, in England. They sound like a whole other movement. But what people don't grasp, we're not just saying, hey, this is just something that's a little bit quirky, and it's a normal sort of Christian movement. When you grasp what you just said there, that last 5 or so minutes, it's counter to the gospel of the New Testament. Adventism is counter to that. It is opposite of that. Milton Hook was on the show a while back, and he said not only does the Adventist Church not understand Christ or Jesus, it is anti-Christ and Jesus in the true understanding of their documentation and source material.
Can I say something?
One last quick thing on that. I have a lot of progressive Adventists say, wow, that John Rosier presentation, that Milton Hook presentation, that was just marvelous. Thank you. And I think those two guys just decimated everything you stand for and proved that your mind is boggled by understanding the simple gospel that can't be found in Adventism. And yet people like you and I said we're the ones attacking the church. Why is that? But go to your point as well.
Well, I was trying to quickly find the quote. It's all right. I'll paraphrase what happened. But if you want to have a fun little like rabbit hole trail in Ellen White's writings, go look up Elder Ballinger.
Oh, yeah.
In her writings. And what's really interesting is I believe he was the one. I hope I'm right on this. If it wasn't him, it was another individual.
He was like the first Des Ford.
He had, I believe it was him that actually had a vision. He had this vision that was actually quite disturbing. And in his vision, he was supposedly thought he was told by God that the understanding of Babylon and come out of her, my people, was in direct reference to Adventism.
Interesting.
And so he actually wrote to Ellen White under great distress, saying, like, I feel convicted. Well, of course, that didn't get caught well by Ellen White, and she fired back just a plethora of letters that was just disparaging him. And the last, she just basically says that he's of the devil and like, don't ever listen to him and don't pay attention. And like,
well, I'd love if you can find that.
Yeah. But the first time that I read about that story, it was like, wow, there were people during her time period that questioned who she was, what she was about, questioned her visions. I'm excited. I'm not going to let the rabbit out of the bag, but I believe Miles is going to do a segment coming up here in the next few months on all the newspaper articles that were written during like historical newspaper articles and what history was saying about this woman. It's not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
It's not. And so some Adventists aren't willing to put that in the mix of how they understand her.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair to who she was. I think we
Right.
should be paying attention to what history said. I think we should be paying attention to firsthand accounts like D.M. Canwright,
Yeah.
who spent physical time with
About
her. Yep.
and that's early. That's way earlier than Ballinger.
Yes, yes. So I think all of this, most Adventists aren't willing to dig into this because they're afraid of what it might uncover. But, are you faithful to Ellen White or are you faithful to God? Like that, we should, our focus should be on honoring Jesus. That's my conviction anyways.
Why do you think? Yeah, and look, well said. That's a gold nugget right there. Why do you think when you or I may say something that seems critical, and John Rosier says not only does the church not understand the gospel, it is anti-gospel, and the very same identical people that criticize. I'm not playing victim. I'm trying to work out the mindset. Why am I attacking the church? And he who still is in the church, and maybe that's the answer, is, oh, wonderful presentation, John. Fantastic. Like what kind of are they not putting together there? One of their guys who they really revere, I do too. John is amazing. He's in my top 10 favorite people. Why can he slam with such a like surgeon's knife? Adventism is anti-gospel, not just doesn't understand the gospel. And the people go, oh, brilliant, that was great. I don't get this kind of sociology or the psychology going on. That what are they not seeing there? That's pretty clear and simple right there.
I think that we all have to ask ourselves what has to be true. Like what am I willing? How far am I willing to go down this road? Am I willing to? And I think one of the things that we talk about in our business is what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of losing? What am I afraid of? Like, what if? Just for a second, because someone that's debating on the other side of me, that's claiming like, Mike, you're not making good arguments, you're badgering, you're this, that, whatever. I saw someone say in just a second ago, you're like Miles, straw man this. Like, okay, just for just a second, can you put yourself in a place that says you're wrong? Like, what if all of your arguments have holes in them? Just what if? Because if you're not willing to dissect any argument with that kind of free will, like that kind of freedom, I don't have a problem. Look at my arguments on things. If they fall apart, they fall apart. But you telling me you're right over me just means that you've got an ego problem. That's all it means. So until we can go to the text, until we can be honest with what the text says, until we can consult experts that spend time in the text and be honest with the fact that Adventist scholars have a bias, other denominational scholars have their bias, everyone has a bias, but we should be able to rightly divide the Word of God. That the Bible does not create confusion. And listen, I'll be honest with you, I feel like inside the Adventist church, there's more confusion on what the church believes than most churches. I'm not saying all, but many churches.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say, like, are you being honest with your own position? Or are you just holding firmly to what you believe because it feels good? I read a book, I don't remember The guy's name, actually I do, his last name is Enns. I don't agree on all of his theology, okay? He's a very far out there on some of his thoughts. But one of his books is called You're Not Saved by Correct Doctrine. And he brings up the idea that it's a similar idea to C.S. Lewis, where he talks about Christian snobism, like where like we as Christians, especially Western Christians, we think that we are right. We think that we're better. We think that listen, we're way smarter than those Jewish people back in the day. Like we've got it figured out. We understand it more than they do. Listen, you're not going to have a great experience with the Word of God thinking that you got it figured out.
Yeah, so true.
And I'm sure someone's going to say, hey, open up the mirror, write it back at you, Mike Colburn. Like, listen, trust me. I know all of my stuff isn't always accurate, and I am more than happy to step down from some of my ideas once I find out that there's a better path. That's what we should do as Christians, sharpen each other's understanding, but not be divisive and just hold true to our doctrines just because that's where our heritage is, or just because I have to.
Yeah. Boy, there's some real challenges there for people who are, having these thoughts and conversations and pushing back. Challenges for us, challenges for them. But I'm really pleased to say we're having the dialogue, and the very people we're talking about are watching right now. So I'm glad that they're involved with the conversation. I'm going to just totally shift gears for a minute. And I just want to read something that Milton H. Thornburn wrote a little bit earlier. And by the way, Milton, remember, you are a standing invitation to come on the show when you can. We've talked a bit about it before, and I really love a lot of your comments that you've shared in the various groups that we have here on SDAQ&A. You were in 2004 investigating the methods of several multi-level marketing, pyramid marketing organizations, and it occurred to me, says Milton, that there were several similarities with the structure and methods of the SDAs. And that's just confirming what we were chatting about before, that other people have thought that too. I want to talk a little bit about how you met your wife. I'm pretty sure you've said that it was at an Adventist academy, but also just to chat a bit about how I think you'd mentioned previously that your parents thought she might have been a bit of a rebel. So share some of those thoughts.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna eat my own crow here for a second, because I said that I would admit when I was wrong. My statement about Babylon and the dream was not Ballinger. I did find it. If you're interested in reading about this story, it's in Selected Messages, Book 2, Chapter 7, under Divine Credentials, and it's a letter called Dear Brother M. I didn't get the right name, okay? But it says here, this is a letter to one who had come to the conclusion that the Seventh-day Adventist Church had fallen into the low spiritual state described as Babylon.
Yeah.
You can read about it. I was wrong. It wasn't Ballinger. That's a totally different thing.
Funny, because when you said Ballinger, I said he was the first Des Ford, and then when you said about the vision, I thought, I don't remember that. And Des,
that was my fault. Again, I admit it. I apologize.
Fine.
I went to my notes. So
fine.
Yes, I was wrong. So there you go, guys. I do admit every once in a while.
Can you send me a link to that in our private chat, and I'll bring it up on the screen maybe, or share a link to it later if you can.
Sure.
So back to how you met your wife, how your parents saw her as a bit of a potential rebel, even though you were both Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah. So this goes back to some of what you were talking about, earlier. I think my parents hoped and desired that I would find someone who came from a non-broken home and, were good Adventists and, were, what they considered to be a good match, for their son. I mean, as any parent, right, would. Like, we hope that our children will find, godly men or women. And so, I think that's where a lot of this came from. When I met my wife senior year in high school at Great Lakes Adventist Academy, she was on the gymnastics team. I think it was called Ericanas. I was the pianist for the choir, and so we were kind of doing different things. The crowd that she ran with. Now, my wife was never really she wasn't really, I would say, per se, a rebel, per se. She hung out with a lot of rebellious people, and she was always the one that was like getting them out of trouble. So she would be the one that would keep their secret or do this or, and again, I'm not trying to paint my wife in a bad view in any way. I loved that about her because as a perfect PK, yeah, right. That's the persona, right? As this godly, young man that plays the piano and has everything. By the way, back then my wife makes fun of them. I had what's called the McDonald's M because I had long blonde hair and it literally parted in the center and it was like the McDonald's M. I don't know how she even thought I was good looking, to be honest with you. But anyways, I mean, she just wasn't she was the black sheep. I mean, in my parents' eyes, I remember very vividly that, my dad said some very hurtful things to her about, that she wore clothes that were too short and that made her, a specific type of person. So yeah, she just wasn't good enough. And I think that plays into the mindset of, I think that plays into the mindset of Adventism, at least for my parents it did. That there's this idea of perfection that evades, that it just seeps into everything that, and they wanted the best for their son. And again, that can be good. There's nothing wrong with wanting the best. So yeah, I don't know if that answered some of what you were.
Yeah,
wanting.
but that's interesting. It's the perceptions that people often have, and it's another filter. Yeah. There's one little side commentary going on there. I'm not sure what Rick had said, but Marie writes back. Yeah, and thanks for those thoughts. I'd love to have your wife on the show sometime and share some of her thoughts as well. And if she's around in another room there, she's welcome to come on and give us all a wave as well. And Marie wrote something back to Rick. It's okay. I get it. I'm disgusted by so much, but not the Sabbath. That does seem to be the most pushback I've had if I've said anything that may be somehow criticizing the Sabbath. And again, I'd ask Marie, do you see the Sabbath as a salvation issue or just as something you've chosen to have as a beautiful day of rest? Have you got some thoughts to add to that at all, Mike?
Yeah, the Sabbath is it's a very sensitive nerve in Adventism, and I understand why, because it's tied to the identity of an Adventist. It's tied to the seal of God. It's tied to the remnant concept. It's tied to end times. It's a test in the end times. I get why. Okay, I would question if those are biblically backed reasons for stamping it that way. But listen, the Sabbath is important. The concept of Sabbath is very, very important. Now, again, I know that the minute I go down this rabbit trail, I'm going to get all kinds of people saying like, oh, you've done the whole evangelical, like whatever, you've gone off sideways listen, guys, I would just say if you're listening, just pay attention when you get triggered in these types of conversations, because if you're getting triggered by something, it's probably an area you need to work on.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
You don't need to agree with everything I'm saying. I don't need you to agree with me. I don't need you to validate what I believe. Like that's a me and God thing, okay? I know I'm saved. I know Jesus' death on the cross saves me, so like I'm good in that regard. How we parse out like all the other stuff that goes on, like, hey, let's just be Christians about this, is what I would say. And so with regards to Sabbath, like it's a part of my SDA culture. I mean, like it's everything I know personally. So it's very similar to like the Jewish feeling, right? So like, can you imagine when Jesus comes on the scene, they crucify him, and now you've got Gentile Jesus followers, Gentile Christians claiming that you don't need to do all the Jewish things in order. Like, you understand that's the same thing. That's the identical conversation in a different context. And so in many ways, the Adventist kind of argument here, or the Adventist like desire to latch onto this, is steeped in the Judaizing of Advent. Like it's the Judaizing side, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's the attachment to the Ten Commandments and the way you view the Ten Commandments and their importance. Just recognize that. That's all I'm asking. Because I think Paul talks about Judaizing. You just go read Romans. Go read, like, guys, read the Bible. Like, these are all common things that get talked about. Most importantly, I would say to remind everyone that Jesus said, love people. That is the greatest commandment. So, irregardless of like whether or not you think you're right or wrong, the minute you start thinking you're right or wrong on situations like this, you're making it about yourself and it's not about God. So I'm not going to give a specific answer. Like, I have a thought on what I think is important about Sabbath, but I know it's going to be met with like
Pushback.
You heretical Colburn! I can't believe you.
Well, Michael C. Probably responding because I called him stubborn. Well, you'd said I can't remember, but I definitely reinforced it. Brother Colburn, so you disagree with Des Ford on the Sabbath? What do you think of that, Peter? Des is your man. So that's his little bit of a try to trigger me. Like, I disagree with lots of things that Des Ford said. I disagree with lots of things that most people have said on lots and lots of topics. One of the things when I discuss Des within Adventism is I'm trying to, and thanks for the opportunity, Michael, so I can kind of reinforce this point, is that I do not like that Des's voice was being suppressed in such a shameful way. So I defend his right to have his material heard, and in some ways SDAQ&A, because we're not a vacuum, we have all sorts of people watching. I get to share what Des was saying, not to condone it or to support it, even though there's lots of things I value about what Des did say. My point is sharing his ideas and thoughts that have been suppressed. So I actually haven't read the Des Ford book on the Sabbath. I've got it right here. But if Des said that that's keeping the Sabbath is not a salvational issue, well, in that case, I do agree with Des on that point.
Yeah,
If he
and I
says
think
something different, there's probably a lot of things I disagree with. I disagree with lots.
yeah, there's lots of ways to parse out the Sabbath. I would say this, guys, Sabbath, I understand it's way more important to understand it as a concept than a literal 24-hour period. In fact, the author of Hebrews is very explicitly comparing things that are less than to what Jesus is. And the Sabbath gets compared. Like Jesus is better.
Mm.
So just you got, and I can't promise you're going to get all the same conclusions, because if you're reading it with the law, if you're reading it, again, go back to what we talked about before. If you're reading it with the Mosaic law in mind, you're going to have a blinder over your eyes. Listen, take that up with God, okay?
Mm.
Ask for the Holy Spirit to help you see some of this stuff. I'm not asking you to see it the way I see it, okay? But just notice that the author of Hebrews, everything is less than Jesus. So, and the big thing that helped me reconcile the statement about Sabbath, there remains a Sabbath rest. And this is where I'm at currently. I'm not saying this is where I'm going to be at a year from now, is that what Jesus did on the cross, this is the concept of Shabbat. You got to understand what Shabbat was. Shabbat was complete rest from the previous things you were doing. So when you go all the way back to Genesis and you look at Sabbath, by the way, there is no Sabbath. There's rest, okay? And there's the seventh day, okay? There is no Sabbath. And by the way, if you pay attention to the narrative, God is the only one that rested, even though Adam and Eve were already created. Now, I understand you could insert some ideas into that, but the text does not uphold that Adam and Eve was required to do anything on. In fact, it makes no sense in Hebrew to make Adam and Eve rest because they didn't do anything to rest from. So in order to rest, you have to have something that you rest from. Now, if you fast forward in the narrative of the Old Testament, there's absolutely no mention of anything related to Sabbath until you get to Exodus 16. You get to Exodus 6, Abraham, there's no Sabbath. There's no comment. There's no reference to anything relating to him keeping it or not keeping it. So you can't say that he did or did. Like, you just can't say, okay? The text doesn't say. Exodus 16 talks about the Sabbath, and guess what? It's a test. Here's where I think Adventists get the idea of it being a test. I don't know. But in Exodus 16, it is a test to see if they're going to pay attention and follow him when he gives the 10 commandments. When he gives not just the 10, but all 613 commandments. The law. So you got to understand that Sabbath is tied to the Old Covenant as a sign. Scripture talks about that. It's the sign of the Old Covenant. Now, it's important. Resting's important. But think about that concept of you can't rest unless you have something to rest from. If you're under the law and you are obligated to follow the law, that's the requirement of the law. Okay, if you're under the Mosaic law, you are obligated. Anytime you break the law, guess what the penalty is? Death. That's the penalty in the Levitical system. Okay? And by the way, guys, there is no sacrifice in the Levitical law for a blatant disregard, moral violation of the law. There's absolutely none. Go study the Levitical system. There is no sacrifice for a violation of the moral law, an intentional violation. That's the reason why if you break the Sabbath, guess what? You die. Okay? mean, that is the requirement. You're stoned. Okay. If
Mm,
you kill someone,
mm,
you are killed. That's why the whole
mm,
the refuge cities were set up. It was because you were obligated. You had to be killed if you killed someone because you violated. Okay, so just understand that if it's that important under the Old Testament system,
mm,
my question to you would be one: how do you know you're actually keeping it in a way that doesn't violate?
exactly. And why
You
aren't you
don't
stoning
know.
people? Why aren't you off
You,
there stoning people that aren't keeping
Yeah, I mean, you see someone go buy something at the store, you should stone them.
it? Report it
I
to
mean,
your head
think
elder.
about it. Like, if you're really going to
Yeah.
be honest with the text,
So
okay?
true. So
So,
true.
so the reason why I think this is important is because when you get to the concept of Sabbath, there remains a Sabbath for those who believe. What are you resting from? All of the requirements of the law. Why do you get to rest? Because Jesus did it for you. It's a concept. It's not the day. Now I get it. Some of you are going to be like, "Oh yeah, you're doing this traditional blah 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 blah." Fine. But just go study it, please. Don't just give the proof text to what Adventists say. I know them all. I've lived it. I know it.
Mm,
Go study. I promise you, you'll come to other conclusions if you honestly wrestle with the text on its
mm,
own context, not
mm.
on the Adventist context, on its own context.
And I wonder, Michael, see if you have ever done that. You say here, Miles totally disagrees with you on the law and Sabbath. So what?
That's fine. I'm not. We can disagree on stuff. That's fine. We don't disagree on Jesus Christ and his sacrifice. Like, that's fine. It's okay.
Um, I want to go to something you touched on a little bit there. Um, yeah, you were talking about how you did have all those kind of answers. You'd said earlier in our interview or our conversation that you would use every one of these proof texts. You knew them all because you wanted to defend Adventism. In many ways, you were an Adventist apologist.
Yeah.
And I I often ask people that I interview if you are a former Adventist apologist, do you think I categorize 4 options, and I didn't come up with. I've kind of added 2, and one of the people I've interviewed brought up the first 2. Just can't remember who it was. I must find it because I often refer to these 4 things. Do you consider yourself to have been duped, deluded, disingenuous, or dishonest when you were an Adventist apologist? They're the only 4 options I see for Adventist
Yeah.
apologists. Sorry, Adventist apologist.
I don't know that I would classify myself as maybe a
Um,
self-proclaimed apologist, right?
back in the day, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
you were out there fighting for the church and you were giving the proof texts and you were having conversations and you were debating others,
Yeah.
when you look back on that, you go, boy, that young Mike Colburn, he was deluded or he was duped. I know you weren't disingenuous. I know you weren't being dishonest.
No, I would say, and I don't know if this is a 6th one. I would say I was misinformed, and maybe that fits under one of those categories.
Yeah, I'd put that
I
into
I
duped.
so here's the thing about um, debates and apologetics is if you don't have all the information, you can make a fatal error in making an argument. I see this happen all the time in academic articles. You'll have a scholar that's engaging he's writing a dissertation, and he happens to forget a particular academic article that deals with a certain thing. And so when someone rebuttals their article, when someone writes about it, they'll say, "Oh, it was great, but so and so didn't actually do the research for this article because this article says this, and I wish they would have engaged in that because that actually potentially damages some of the art." So my point in all this is like, I think for me, I didn't have all the information. I had the Adventist playbook, but the Adventist playbook doesn't have all the information.
Right.
So I was convicted that, man, I knew what was right and how to argue it and all that stuff. And I argued it till I was blue in the face. In fact, most people just considered me to be very egocentric and self-centered because I thought I was always right. And I feel like, and this is just me being harshly honest, I feel like that is an Adventist theme. Like if you are, Adventism teaches you that they have the truth. So why would you ever go anywhere else if you have the truth?
Yeah. And I would suggest that you were purposely misinformed, which I then put into the category of duped. I don't think Adventists, I don't think your leaders and teachers withhold information unless they're doing it for a reason.
I have recently met people that do intentionally not engage in what they know to be there because they're going to lose their job. They're going to, something's going to happen. They're in a, again, track the money. A lot of times money says a lot about things. I'm not going to go on the conspiracy theorist side, but yeah, money, power, wealth,
numbers.
Yep. All that stuff.
So what did you actually study at college? And can you just remember, and I'm guessing that a lot of these debates you had were at the college itself, maybe not, but so just tell us, what did you study at college, and can you share any memories you have of some of these actual debates you had with people, anything specific?
I don't remember specifics, but I will tell you that when I first got to college, my initial, I was going to be a pastor. That didn't happen very much. That was like the first month, and I was out. I didn't want to do that at that time, and so I ended up actually getting a degree in mathematics. That was my emphasis. My major was advanced mathematics, and then my minor was education. So I was a secondary ed teacher, grades 7 to 12, I think, is the actual credentials that I had. And then I minored in piano performance. And my wife, she really wanted to be a nurse. I don't remember the details around why she didn't stay in that. I remember her telling me that, and she's going to probably wish I remembered. But she ended up moving into education, and she minor or majored in child psychology. Yeah, she's, and again, that's definitely down her avenue. I mean, she ended up at one point running her own coaching business, and has a great ability to listen to people and process and help people accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. But my main focus was mathematics. And so if you can just bear with me and understand that my brain is math driven, and I'm a highly well-trained musician. So now my musician side is a trained ear. So my next oldest brother, Dave, he's way better than me from an ear standpoint. That guy has an incredible ear. Him and his wife is a concert trained violinist. They have a whole ministry, Colburn ministry, that they go around and do concerts and things at Adventist churches and sell their CDs and all that stuff. Do they make CDs anymore? Yeah, they do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they do. They're having a bit of a comeback. Yeah.
But the way my brain works, just so you guys know, is even as I'm playing the piano, I play by ear, but I also am classically trained. When I play, my brain is analytically putting all of the theory together while I'm playing. So you got to understand that the way I process and think, it's extremely logical. Now, some would say that's my bias and that's a disadvantage because, well, God isn't logical, right? Like he's God. Okay, but he made us to have brains and he made things work like science. Like he is a God of organization and not chaos. So like the way my brain functions is things have to make sense. And if they don't make sense, I'm going to call horse crap on it. Like I'm just going to. Like it's just I don't believe it. I don't buy it. You got to prove to me that stance is upheld. And so that's a lot of what, now early on, I thought Adventism was completely right. And so I would argue vehemently on topics like, like the state of the dead, which that's a whole nother topic for another time. Okay. Things like, Sabbath, things like end times topics and understand and I just knew where to go to make the arguments all work because that's the way my brain worked. But I wasn't willing to explore the areas that challenged my way of thinking. So
you did teach in the Adventist system though as well after you'd finished college?
I did. Both my wife and I did. We lived in Hiram, Georgia. I taught at GCA, which is in the Georgia Cumberland Conference, for like a year and a half. And then I ended up starting my own piano teaching company business in the metro Atlanta area. And then my wife, she taught at the private school, Adventist school there. And then we both moved up to East Tennessee, where I took a principal / teaching position. And then it was at that point that we got pregnant. My wife got pregnant with twins, and she ended up not, continuing in the education side. I ended up having an awful run-in with that particular. That was an E.G. White doctor is what it was. Just an adamant E.G. Whiter that I locked horns with as a green behind the ear, didn't know what I was doing, type of teacher. And so I ended up actually getting fired from that position, and that's where I started into the financial industry, which is kind of where my wife and
I wanted to come to that. It's a good segue into talking about that. But you're saying that because of theological issues, you were fired from the school?
It wasn't because of theological issues. It was because I'm trying to remember exactly what had happened. I disagreed with a stance that the school board chair had. And I vehemently disagreed. I was willing to, and I expected the conference to back me. And instead of backing me, they backed the doctor because the doctor financed the school.
Right, yeah.
And so I ended up getting fired and gag ordered not to say anything about what happened. Now, since that has happened, I've had officials apologize and say I was mistreated and that I wasn't. My parents were very bothered by it. They knew I had been mistreated, but I think it was a God thing. He knew that I needed to go a different direction. Now I didn't like being treated. Feel any kind of hostility towards the church in that in that situation at all. Michael, I would appreciate you just not making those comments. I'm not upset at the church. That kind of stuff doesn't do any value to anything if you're paying attention.
He's just trolling now.
Yeah.
I'd even turned the chat off. I forgot it was still going there. It's still going like crazy.
That's fine.
When you began to potentially be seen as a heretic within the Adventist church, you've gone from this apologist and willing to debate people and used use proof text to support Ellen and the whole church. As that transition came to eventually to last week when you officially took your name off, people must have been going, hang on a second. I remember Frank Merendino sharing a story that he was very involved in his church elder or head elder as well, like you were. And he preached a couple of sermons that seemed to be a little bit too gospel oriented, and he was told that he's not allowed to say that kind of stuff from the pulpit anymore. Did you get some people saying to you, look, we're sensing that you're going down the wrong path here? You've had conversations with your dad that he said that, but did you find the church folk and the local leaders in that church and conference started sending you warnings to shush up?
So it's funny that you share that story, because it's almost identical to the last 3 months. So the last year and a half to 2 years, I have, prior to our pastor that just joined us at the church that we left. I had run, my wife and I, for the most part, had operated the church. Like, I was the head elder inside the Adventist system. Anytime there's an absence of a pastor, the head elder kind of is seen as the lay pastor per se. And so I was preaching 2-3 times a month with regularity. I refused to do any Ellen White quotes. I just don't preach that way. I preach the Bible, and that's what I focus on. I don't have a problem bringing in other authors' perspectives. I sometimes got condemned a little bit on that. Why are you willing to bring in, certain scholars, but you're not willing to bring up Ellen White? So I got a little bit of a slap on the wrist for that kind of stuff but I remember preaching a very specific sermon, and it was actually the first sermon I've ever done on the gospel of Jesus Christ and what actually is the gospel of Jesus Christ, his life, death, and resurrection. Like, that's what's described in the New Testament as the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I worked through like what that entailed and like why it was such a big thing. And I spoke about, the fact that all these other things that are key in people's lives that we make important, like I made statements like this: the Sabbath is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. The 10 Commandments are not the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, you can insert, you put whatever you want in there. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's what the gospel is. Now, after that particular sermon, I got some pretty heated hate messages. I have one in particular guy. I can't take him too seriously, but he definitely he claimed that I wasn't an Adventist. He's like, well, you're a joke. You can't be preaching that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff. And I remember having a sit down. That was actually when we had our current pastor there, when I preached that particular sermon. And so I sat down with the pastor at the time, and we just kind of worked through what was going on. And and he admitted to me that, like, listen, Mike, I agree with every.
Sorry, you've frozen up there. He said I might have to see if you can just log out and log back in again just quickly there, because you've totally frozen. I've got plenty of Wi-Fi coming through, so it looks like it might be your end. So Mike, if you can hear me, there we go. Mike's just momentarily frozen and will join us again for this fascinating conversation. And thank you, everyone, for agreeing and disagreeing and putting your thoughts in and writing in the comments. If you've got comments that you would really like to share on where are we? On the YouTube platform, you'll need to cut and paste them and put them over there. As I've said many times, YouTube just deletes all the live comments, which really annoys me because there are absolutely incredible comments coming through there. And so, yeah, we're just waiting for Mike to log back in, and then we'll wrap it up soon. I'll just send him a message. But sadly, his Wi-Fi seems to have dropped out. He's back now. And just before I bring him back in, just a quick plug. It looks like it may not be working. Mike, if you can hear me, I'll try and bring you on in a second. But a quick plug tomorrow, and I often can get people confused. Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time in the USA, and Wednesday, and Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Australia, Sydney time. Robert Brinsmead is going to be on the program. So you do not want to miss that. Let's see if we can get Mike back on. Are you there, Mike?
I hope so.
We can hear you, but we can't see you. Is there a button you
I
can click?
apologize.
No, it's not your fault. There we go. Not your fault at all. This is the Wi-Fi gremlins. They love to come and annoy things. You were just saying the elder said to you, I agree with you, but...
Yeah, so it was the pastor that I was speaking with,
the
and he
pastor,
said,
right.
yeah, he said, I agree with what you were saying. I agree with what you said in the sermon, but you have to expect that when you talk about the Sabbath like that, or you talk about the Ten Commandments, you're going to tick people off. And it was this, like, you got to understand that when you're in Adventist church, you have to give them Adventism.
Yeah.
Now,
And I guess if you're employed by the Adventist church, in many ways, that's the honorable thing to do.
yeah, I guess so. And this is again one of the things that I'm like, well, that's fine, but I'm not comfortable with just giving people
Exactly.
Adventism. I want
Yeah.
to give them Jesus.
You
Like,
have
I
to
want
cut,
to.
you have to cut a bit of something out of you to do that, don't you? You go, okay, I can't really share my beliefs. That's why it's so difficult to get a currently ordained, currently employed SDA worker or pastor onto the program.
Yeah,
They'll say
for sure.
off the scenes, oh, we don't agree with Ted Wilson. We'll come and say that on the show. Oh, can't say that publicly.
Yeah.
We segued and then got segued into something else. How did you get into the financial industry? And I'm gathering that had a bit of a role to play in all this as well. Can you unpack a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I got into, actually, when I exited out of teaching, I moved into a career with Northwestern Mutual as a financial advisor, insurance financial advisory work. And that was kind of, we're getting into the realm of my conversation, my story, my journey that took a pretty ugly turn. I was at Northwestern for 3.5, going on 4 years. It was the Christmas before 2000. It was Christmas of 2014 that I thought I was walking into a conversation with my mentor, one of my good friends in the business. I had scheduled a meeting with them. And instead of walking into a conversation, I was walking into a meeting where the compliance officer was there, and I was given an ultimatum to either walk away or to either get fired. So there's a theme here, and some of you might pick up on it. I got let go from my teaching career. I got let go from my interaction with Northwestern Mutual. And the latter one, the one with Northwestern Mutual, was 100% because I was living a lifestyle that was lacking in integrity and honesty. So there's some background to this, and that is that I always tell people when I interact with this part of the story that I had learned through my interaction with Northwestern Mutual how to be a hero at work and a zero at home. So this is our girls were a couple of years old at this point. They don't remember most of this, and I'm grateful for that. But I had, you got to understand that I was doing Bible studies. I was engaged at the church. I was teaching all the, doing all the stuff I was supposed to do, and all the, being a good Adventist, all that stuff. But I ended up fostering a over a year and a half adulterous relationship with another woman. And that just almost tore apart my marriage, as you can obviously would expect, right? And I don't share this, this kind of stuff isn't easy to share because obviously I don't think anyone really wants to air their own dirty laundry. I share this because I want people to understand the transformation that Jesus can truly do in your life. This is not about Mike Colburn and he's got everything right and all that stuff. Listen, I am in desperate need of a Savior. That's the honest truth. I feel as if I'm a Paul. I am the worst of all sinners. And it was at this point in my life that I had just created this double life. I had this life with this other individual, and I would come home and I would be an awful husband because I had ugliness on my inside. I mean, I just was not living a life that was honoring God and imaging Him well. And when it all, the big culminating kind of thing that really kicked this whole thing into overdrive was we had moved into an apartment in Johnson City. And there was something that was unique between my wife and I. My wife has always been very dedicated to God, has always had a close connection to God in her own way. And whenever I did things that were unchristian, whenever I engaged in activities that were not representative of God and living by the laws of Messiah, it's almost as if God, through the Holy Spirit, was convicting her that I was doing something. And the way this would transpire, and some of you might think this is weird. Listen, God is very real. The supernatural realm is very real. Very, very real. But this particular evening, we were in our apartment, and it was a very small, less than 1,000 square foot apartment. It was me, my wife, the twin girls. We had 2 dogs and 2 cats. So there you go. There was a lot of things in that small apartment. But it was our master bedroom. Then there was a living room, and then across the hall there was 2 bedrooms and a half bath. And the way my wife retold the story later on is that she woke up at 3:00 in the morning. Now, just as a side note, 3:00 is not a good time period in the evil supernatural realm. It's called the witching hour. Okay, so that's going to give you some context to what began to transpire. She woke up, she looked across the living room. It was obviously very dark, and she saw in the hallway a dark figure with kind of a hood on that turned and looked and glared at her. And of course, she's very afraid. She knows it's not a human, okay? It's something else, something other. And she shakes me awake. And what she proceeds to do is as I remember the story anyways, is she proceeds to say, what have you done? What are you doing to let these things in? There's a demonic spirit trying to get into the girl's room. What have you done? And I had learned a very bad habit of lying. I mean, I created all the right reasons, like because I was trying to protect her, and all this. Like, I had learned the habit of protecting myself by lying. And this is where God got involved in this situation. So what happened is she knew I was not telling. I haven't done anything. I didn't do anything, right? And she became she started shaking, internally shaking, not like internally. Her organs, her body was shaking, uncontrollable. There's nothing she could do. It was as if something else was shaking her internally. And she just kept saying, Mike, you're not telling me the truth. You're not telling me the truth.
Wow.
And it was at this point, after back and forth, that I broke out into tears, and I told her what was going on and told her what I had been doing. And it was when I told her that she just quit shaking. It was like calm on her body. Now, I wish I could tell you that the next few months were amazing. They weren't. That was hell for our marriage. 2015, and it absolutely my fault. I was not following Christ. I was not living in a way that I should be living. I was dishonoring my wedding vows. I was dishonoring my wife and my kids. But that was the starting point for our pursuit to really get to know God. Because when we moved out to Arkansas 6 months later, my wife decided that she was going to try to make it happen. All of you ladies out there, if you've ever been through that, like, talk about a godly woman that's loyal. Like, and all you guys that are looking for someone, like, you can't have my wife because she's the best. Okay? She's already taken. And I am so happy that she is such a godly woman and that she's just so loyal through all the crap that I put her through. So we moved out to Arkansas, and it was in Arkansas, in our first home that we rented there, that we really decided to engage with God. And I remember sitting down in that home, that it was a small home that we were renting, and I remember my wife asking me, like, Mike, I need you to lead our family spiritually. I want you to be the head of the household spiritually. And my response, I don't know if it was the right one, but my response was, I don't know how. Like, I don't even know what it's like to have a relationship with God. I love you, babe. So it was at that stage that we both decided to begin to have a relationship with God on our own. And we committed the business to God. We committed ourselves to Him. We committed our marriage, our kids. And we said that if we're going to make this work, it has to be built on a relationship with God first. And it's in 2015, the middle of 2015, that I did a not so good thing in the Adventist world. And that was, I decided to take my tithe that I was giving to the church, and I decided to invest it in Bible study And that's when I got introduced to Logos Bible study software. I began to study the Word of God, began to dedicate time, and I became, and here's what's beautiful, guys. I used to be addicted to something that was very damaging in my life. Now I'm addicted to studying the Bible. I'm addicted to having a relationship with God. I don't know how to be the best husband in the world or the best father, but I know that if God is in me, something good will come out. And so it's why we are so committed as a family to pursuing Scripture and pursuing the Lord through His Word. His Word is living. It will cut you to the bone or to the marrow. It will do that. It's done it to me. And don't look at me, please. This is all Him. All Him. So I don't remember the question, man, but that's the story.
Wow. Just let me gather my own thoughts. That's such powerful stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of that. This is not something that we'd discussed. I loved your wife's, response while you were talking.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
She really is. I'll say this. I remember early on in our marriage, I didn't really know if I would have a good marriage. Like, everyone wants a great relationship, and everyone deep back in their mind, like, well, someone's going to let me down. They're human. Like, yeah, well, I major letdown, right? But I didn't really even know what it was like to have a great marriage or a good marriage. I even had thoughts of, like, my wife isn't as smart as me, and I'm not, like, very, very damaging view of a relationship. But I can tell you, coming through everything we've come through, and I have so much respect for her view, her intellect, her wisdom, the way she loves our kids, the way she honors me and my pursuits, I never thought in a million years that I could have this kind of friendship and relationship on earth with someone like her. So we often say, like, would we do it over again? Man, I would never want to put her through that again, but I am so grateful that we got through it. I'm so grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, what a conversation we've had today. There's things I wanted to touch on, but I think we'll leave them for another time.
Yeah.
I just want you to kind of, because it's so powerful right now. I wonder if you can share a little bit about what does life after Adventism look like for you, and was there a reluctance to leaving the church?
Yeah. Yeah, there's you never know what it's really going to be like. You never really know what your friends, family, church friends, what's going to be said, how it's going to be painted. And I think that's probably been the most difficult aspect of study. It's only been a week and a couple of days. I've already had 5 minutes of the next Sabbath sermon, preached on how we don't spend time in the Word, and we're, it's the shaking of the church, and people are leaving. I've already had. I mean, it's to be expected, but I will tell you that, and this isn't. I don't say this to necessarily encourage people to leave. I would follow Des Ford on this. Like, listen, I want you to have a very real relationship with Jesus, and I want you to continue to pursue. But for us, there wasn't anything more to give in the Adventist framework. And so for us, what does it look like? I mean, we found a fabulous Christian church that just is focusing on biblical study, staying true to the Word, that's very intentional about their worship. And we're kind of in the stage of, someone mentioned to me, it sounds like, Mike, you guys are in the stage of the greenhouse effect, where like right now you just need people to pour into you because you've poured into other people your entire life. And that's one aspect that I've been very grateful for. In Adventism, Sabbath is probably the least restful day. Like it's the busiest because you're going to church and getting ready and doing this and doing that and doing all the stuff. At least if you're involved in church. And so now it's like, listen, we still rest on Sabbath. I don't want people to think like that, and that has nothing to do with our salvation. Like, it's a part of our heritage and culture. Like we still try to refrain from doing everything we're used to doing the previous week. But Sunday is become like, we love worship. Like we love to be able to get poured into and let the Holy Spirit wash over us and bask in what it is that He's done. So, it's a bittersweet experience because there's so many Adventist connections that don't know how to process this. And then there are dozens of others that have privately reached out and said, man, we're with you. You're so brave. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for doing what it is that you do. So it's a new chapter. I guess I would say that, Peter. It's just a new chapter, and we're going to let God write it. That's what we're going to do.
Wow. I've loved this conversation, learned a lot. You've been able to articulate things that I have trouble. I know them in here, but getting them out here. Parade Orange has written praise about your incredible openness just there. Madeline has written praise the Lord for restoration. God is able.
Yeah, He is.
Marie shares a little bit of her story there, which is quite sad in a similar situation. Rick has written, God bless you both, you and your wife. Keep it balanced, Mike. Life is all about balance. No addiction, man. We've got one life, God, wife, and kids in balance, which I think you're doing now. And your wife has written to Marie, so sorry you had to go through that. Life is hard, but God is good. He can get us through anything.
Yeah.
And got a big thumbs up from No Sunday Law Coming. And Rick, I'll finish with this one. We're all growing at SDAQ&A, and thanks for noticing that, Rick. That's what we're all about, is building up a community in here that can find common ground. There's so many things that we can all disagree on and have interesting conversations on, but boy, there's some great community growing in here, which was unexpected, actually. I didn't plan it, but I've always loved the notion of community. Hey, I want to ask you a question, not put you on the spot.
Yeah.
But I'd love you to be our next gospel presenter. And I'd love Rick to come on as well. So Rick, get in touch with me. And maybe we can make that happen next week. I don't know. What I'm hoping to do is Thursday Pacific time, 6:30. Try and make our SDA church time, and that which is our Friday 11:30 a.m. So I don't know if you're even up to maybe doing this week's one. Have a ponder. I won't put you on the spot to answer, but have a ponder. You did say before you'd be interested in that, but I think if you let me know soon, I can promote it tomorrow. And I just think after the incredible presentation today, having you come on straight after that with a gospel message inside of SDAQ and church would be very powerful. So have a think about that. The invitation is Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and that's for those watching here in Australia. That's 11:30 Sydney time on the Friday. So I'll just let that hang. You ponder that, and we'll see how we go, because yeah, and Rochelle Anonymous has only just joined us just in the last 10, 15 minutes. And Rochelle, go back and watch the whole thing. It's just been an amazing journey, this conversation. So I'm going to leave it up to you for any last comments. Don't forget, though, everyone, tomorrow, Robert Brinsmead is on Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Work out all the other time zones. And Sydney time, Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Robert Brinsmead. You will find him at almost every point of Adventism in some remarkable fashion, from being quite a leader in the real historic traditional Adventists to being right out there with the more liberal progressive righteousness by faith. He wrote that book 1844 Re-Examined. He's written incredible work. I'm pretty sure he's now agnostic and just gone, but his legacy is incredible, and he's going to be sharing some very interesting thoughts. He and I touched on it in our last interview, some very interesting thoughts in the Jesus movement that arose after Christ died on the cross, and that went in a different direction to the Pauline direction. It is fascinating. So I look forward to people joining us tomorrow. But Mike, thank you so much. I'll bring up on the screen how people can get in touch with you, but I'd love you just to have the final word there. Just summarize today's chat and anything you want to share.
Yeah, well, first of all, I thank you for the opportunity. It's hard to believe that it's been 4 hours.
Incredible.
And believe it or not, it's like 12:30 in the morning for me.
Yeah, I know that you were going to be staying up a bit late tonight.
But no, I just appreciate the opportunity. It's not only nice to be able to share, but it's also, I hope that this in some way has positively affected, those that currently have watched or those that will continue to be able to watch later on. And I just want to reiterate, this really isn't about Mike and Jen Colburn. And I know this is our narrative and our story, but this is really all about Jesus and what he's doing and what he continues to do. And my only explanation to why it's about him is he's got to be alive. Like, I'm just telling you, like, that there's no other way to explain it. He is the living King. He is our Savior. And so I just want all of those watching to just re-examine your own lives and fall in love with Jesus again, and be willing to let that lead you where it needs to lead you, whatever that is. But don't ever let go of Jesus. His sacrifice is enough for you. So yeah, I'd love to have you guys, follow on the blog. I'd love to have you reach out, connect with me. Welcome to friend me on Facebook if you want to, but would love to help in any way I can. Just here to be a servant of the Lord. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Everyone, please shoot up those love hearts and thank yous and farewell comments. Thank you so much, Mike. Until next time, we're going to have to do this again. Ponder my gospel message for a couple of days' time. And we will certainly have you back very soon. I had at least another 10 or 12 questions I wanted to run past you. We will come back, and we can do another 4 hours easy. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and help build the community. Like and subscribe, and if you can support it all, I've got a little donation QR code there, and we'll look forward to chatting to you all again tomorrow. See you, Mike, and thanks again, mate. Thanks you so much.
Peter. Yeah, thank you.